idea of thinking with John Paul II has been embodied in the GP2 lectures series, which are monthly lectures of eminent interdisciplinary academics who revisit the extraordinary contribution of John Paul II for our own day. On special occasions important to the Church, we also gather to discuss crucial theological, philosophical, and historical issues from John Paul II's perspective. Today, we gather here a few days after Divine Mercy Sunday, on a day marking 25 years since the canonization of Sister Faustina Kowalska by Pope John Paul II, to explore the theological meaning of divine mercy and discuss the works of mercy in the Church today. This is also a time of mourning and reflection on the pontificate of the late Pope Francis, remembering how significant the message of divine mercy was to him throughout his service to the Church. Before we begin, let us say a prayer for the salvation of his soul. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Saint John Paul II, pray. Saint Faustina Kowalska, thank you. Now I'm pleased to give the floor to Rector of the Angelicum, Father Thomas White, and he opened the conference.
Thank you so much, Father Cezary. Of course, I'm inspired first by the short but so profound prayer that we have all learned to interiorize from Sister Faustina. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. As many of our students here know, and I think all the Dominicans, St. Thomas Aquinas in the first part of the Summa Theologiae has a famous question on mercy and justice, in which he asks whether there's mercy and justice in all of God's works, to which he answers affirmatively, yes. There's an objection, however, to the question that says, but to create us need not be an act of mercy. And yet Aquinas states that it is a mercy even to give us being. He says to bring what is not into existence is itself a gift of mercy. And so in that light, to be created itself is a mercy of God who has brought us, we creatures who are made in God's image, into being to enjoy God, to learn, to love, to experience life, to find happiness and even beatitude with God, all grounded by the gift of mercy. Mercy is in all things, governing all things serenely, leading all things to their ultimate fulfillment. The Second Vatican Council, in the famous document on the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, in the famous paragraph 22, spoke about the universality of the grace of Christ offered to all, such that all human beings find elaborated in Christ the ultimate destiny and mystery of what it is to be human, for in his life, death, and resurrection, we begin to perceive ultimately what we are made for. And God unites himself in a way known to God with all of humanity, with every human being, in the light of the atonement, the death and resurrection of Christ the Savior. Mercy in grace is offered to all. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and all the whole world. So in this framing I'm introducing, there's the mercy of creation, and there's the mercy of redemption, there's the gift of being, there's the gift of grace. Both of them are, in a way, founded in the more transcendent origin of all things in divine mercy. Surely, if Sister Faustina is canonized in our time and is a source of spiritual enlightenment, devotional orientation and focus for the church, and God knows she's had a massive impact on the spiritual life of the church through her example and teaching. It's in part so that we can receive this great teaching about the universality of mercy. And the last thing I just want to say is that it seems to me evident that we live in an age in which our world is often blind or deaf to the significance of the fundamental importance of mercy in public life. Human beings are fault-ridden. Human governments, human institutions, human families, indeed the personnel of the church. It's not a reason to hide from justice. In fact, it's a reason to emphasize justice. It's important to maintain just structures, vigilance about human rights and human laws and justice and transparency. But there is no civil life without mercy, because human beings will fail, and we need to be rehabilitated by love that conquers human faults through forgiveness and mercy. A culture without mercy is an unsustainable culture. The culture of Catholic mercy is a more inclusive culture than the mere culture of liberal tolerance, because the culture of Catholic mercy reaches into the roots of the human being in all of its depths, yes, in all of its limits, but also in all of its possibilities. Mercy acknowledges what the human being is capable of. And at the same time, the culture of Catholic mercy is more perfective, more perfectionistic in the best sense, because it seeks to reintegrate the person who is fallen or frail or fragile or limited into the integrity of service, of self-gift, of incorporation, of communion. There is no perfect life in society without communion. Mere mutual acceptance, mere social tolerance that characterizes our modern individualism is not communion. Communion requires mercy, and it requires the drive to perfect knowledge of truth and perfect love, the common search for the truth, the common search to love. So, obviously, it's not common to have philosophical reflection on devotional topics like Sister Faustina and her message of divine mercy, but that's a problem itself. One thing that can happen in a place like a pontifical university is we can think deeply, philosophically, anthropologically, artistically, theologically, about something so fundamental as what's going on when we say the Divine Mercy Chaplet. And that is actually of great relevance for every philosopher, for every intellectual seeker, for everyone interested in political life, for everyone interested in artistic realism in our world today. So I commend the Institute for this wonderful work. I make the habitual and common excuse that I have to now leave to do other things. But this is another instance in which there's a demonstration of the, I think, relevance, vitality, and vision of the work of the John Paul II Institute for Culture, and I thank all of its organizers and participants this day. Thank you.
Father Rector, thank you very much. Now, I'm pleased to give the floor to Dr. Dariusz Karłowicz, the initiator of this conference, philosopher, president of St. Nicholas Foundation, the strategic partner of the Institute, and the St. John Paul II Institute of Culture program director. Dr. Karłowicz will introduce you all the program of today's meeting. Dr. Karłowicz, the floor is yours.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to welcome you at this very special occasion at another conference organized by St. John Paul II Institute of Culture here at the Angelicum. Our focus today will be revisiting the history of theological meaning of the devotion to divine mercy, which is today definitely one of the most popular religiosity forms among the faithful of all continents languages, and cultures. The image of merciful Jesus associated with this cult can be seen today in churches all over the world. The diary of Sister Faustina Kowalska can be found in millions of Catholic homes and libraries. Millions of people pray the words of the Chaplet of Divine Mercy every day. At least for two popes of our time, St. John Paul II and the late Pope Francis, the issue of teaching, cult, and practice of divine mercy was the center, the very center of Christian teaching and life. If someone writes the history of Catholic Church in 200 years, that's my hypothesis, then looking from the perspective of time, he will be able to call the period of the turn of the millennium the era of the cult of divine mercy. And I think he will be right. What makes this devotion so special and vibrant? What were its beginnings? Who was Faustina, that simple sister from a faraway land, and how did her message spread throughout the world? What are the main areas in need of works of mercy today? These are the questions we wish to address today. Our meeting will consist of two sessions. The first one will focus on the theology of divine mercy and the history of its rediscovery in the beginning of the 20th century and the growth of devotion over the recent decades. We will begin with the lecture of Father Professor Michał Paluch, who will walk us through the most important phases of the development of a divine mercy devotion in the 20th century. Next, Professor Izabela Rutkowska will take us back to the story of Faustina to highlight some most meaningful issues from her life and mission. After a short coffee break, we'll turn our attention to works of mercy, especially worth discussing today in the area of humanitarian work, migrant assistance, and the palliative hospice care. Our speakers in this part will be Mr. Alistair Dutton, Secretary General of Caritas Internationalis, Mr. Massimiliano Signifredi from the Community of Sant'Egidio, and Sister Michaela, the Director of the Hospice in Vilnius. Please welcome all our guest speakers with a round of applause. We wish to conclude our meeting with a short fragment of a documentary showing the life paths of St. John Paul II and Sister Faustina Kowalska, intertwined in the joint endeavor to promote the Divine Mercy devotion. Now, please let me warmly welcome our first speaker, Father Professor Michał Paluch. Father Paluch has been a member of the Dominican Orders in 1987. He's a theologian, lecturer, and former rector of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome from 2017 to 2021, and one of the founders of our institute. I should insist that important fact from my point of view. He specialized in fundamental theology, eschatology, and soteriology. He earned his doctorate in the history of dogmatic theology at University of Freiburg in Switzerland, and habilitation in philosophy from Polish Academy of Science. During his academic career, he was lectured at the Dominican House of Studies in Krakow and in the Thomistic Institute in Warsaw, Poland, and as well as the Angelicum in Rome. Father Professor, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Everything should work. Good afternoon. thank you for this kind introduction and this invitation, which is really an honor for me to speak this afternoon to you. So, yes, you will feel the danger of such an introduction, because what I want to say is a little bit too expanded, but I will try to do my best. I would like to start with quoting John Paul II's remarks following the consecration of the Divine Mercy Shrine in Łagiewnicki, Poland, on August 17, 2002. At the end of this solemn liturgy, I desire to say that many of my personal memories are tied to this place. During the Nazi occupation, when I was working in the Solway factory near here, I used to come here. Even now I recall the street that goes from Borek Wałęski to Dębniki that I took every day going to work on the different turns with the wooden shoes on my feet. They are the shoes that we used to wear then. How was it possible to imagine that one day the man with the wooden shoes would consecrate the Basilica of the Divine Mercy at Łagiewnicki of Kraków? As you understand, John Paul II juxtaposed two images here. The first is that of a young Karol Wojtyła who during the German occupation goes to work at the Solway factory every day in wooden clogs and is also an underground student of theology at that time. The other is that of the successor of St. Peter, the Bishop of Rome, who 60 years later is consecrating the Divine Mercy Shrine just a few hundred feet from the Solway factory. With his characteristic sense of the mystery inscribed in human history, John Paul II wanted to bear witness and share his conviction that interpreting his life in God's light, he saw it as an extraordinary illustration of the work of God's mercy. There were multiple reasons for that. It was more than just the fact that his first difficult steps of adult life took place in a factory located near the convent where Faustyna Kowalska spent her last years, dying in 1938 on the eve of World War II at the tender age of 33. Many more striking coincidences connected Karol Wojtyła's life with the legacy of Sister Faustina. As Archbishop of Krakow, in 1965, Wojtyła decided to start the informative process for Faustina at the diocesan level. John Paul II beatified Faustina on April 18, 1993, and later canonized her on April 30th, 2000, the first canonization of the new millennium. At that time, he also declared the second Sunday of the Easter season as Divine Mercy Sunday. When he came to Poland for his last pilgrimage and consecrated the new Mercy Shrine in the Łagiewnicki district of Kraków, where he spoke the words I quoted at the beginning, the motto of his pilgrimage was God rich in mercy. And during the Mass celebration at Krakow's Błonie Park, attended by some 2.5 million faithful, he made his famous call for the imagination of mercy, which was translated into English later on as creativity in charity. I think that this Polish expression, imagination of mercy, is a little bit stronger and better. His earthly pilgrimage ended on April 2nd, 2005, after the first Vespers of Mercy Sunday, as if divine providence wanted to solemnly confirm the accuracy of the papal comment. The sequence of events in John Paul II's life seems to constitute a certain crescendo that increasingly exposes the vital importance of the idea of mercy in his life and in the mission of the Church, led by him. And April 30th, 2000, the canonization of Sister Faustina and the linking of the Sunday of the octave of Easter to mercy is a watershed moment for the Church community as a whole, I think. However, While the watershed moment in articulating the role of mercy in the mission of the Church happened during the great jubilee of Christianity in the year 2000, the idea of presenting the Church's mission precisely in this way was born much earlier and was primarily related to the second encyclical Dives in Misericordia, published on November 30th, 1980. That is why I would like to examine this document primarily. Although Sister Faustina's name is not mentioned in it even once, John Paul II admitted in one of his interviews that he had been thinking about her for a long time when he began work on Dives in Misericordia. The document can therefore undoubtedly be seen as an expression of his long reflection on the spark that had arisen in his archdiocese and wanted to ignite the world with God's love, and at the same time as an attempt to lay a biblical and theological foundation for renewed thinking about God's mercy. For me, the encyclical is one of the most interesting and relevant texts of the entire pontificate. It is also truly innovative theologically in the best sense of the word. It doesn't attempt to abandon the tradition of the Church, but seeks to help us refresh our understanding of it. However, in order to see this and construe the essence of John Paul II's innovative take, we need to understand the context well. Let me start by outlining the main framework of the traditional Catholic thinking on God's mercy, and only afterwards will I present John Paul II's interpretation, attempting to signal some of its most vital implications at the end. So please be a little bit patient, because it will take about 20-25 minutes just to prepare this final interpretation of John Paul II's so to say, understanding of divine mercy. Context of tradition. Usually, when we speak of mercy today, we mean an empathetic and compassionate attitude towards someone who is in some kind of need, a situation of privation, injury, danger, or necessity of incurring punishment. Mercy can manifest itself both in actions aimed at bringing relief to specific material or spiritual need, or in waiving or significantly reducing punishment. If we described an enduring attitude of this kind, we can speak of a virtue that is a permanent structure of good actions. In the Christian context, such a way of responding to the misery of another being characterizes God to the highest degree. And human action is supposed to be an imitation of divine action, as indicated by Jesus in St. Luke's Gospel 6:36, "Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." The numerous Gospel parables and passages topped by the story of the prodigal son, the merciful father, the merciful Samaritan, and the woman caught in adultery are meditations on various aspects related to the implementation of such a model of behavior and the relationships flowing from it. The topic is, of course, fundamental and hence very broad. However, it seems that for centuries there have been three doctrinal questions, or theological loci, if you want, around which reflections on mercy have crystallized in theological thinking. First, in an attempt to describe the divine nature as precisely and in a way that would minimize the inadequacies as much as possible, theologians asked about the relationship of mercy to God's other attributes, which with justice as the forefront. Second, in considering the process of justification of the sinner accomplished by Christ on the cross, theologians pondered what place should be given to mercy. Third, and finally, in a careful analysis of the virtues, the structures that order personal actions, it was necessary to situate mercy in a convincing way, that is, to properly position mercy in relation to love. Let us take a closer look at each of these questions. Each of them is the fruit of contemplating biblical texts, but in order to simplify this presentation, I will focus exclusively on the speculative part. Do you understand? Theology, in the sense God in himself. Economy, with the summit of everything on the cross of Christ. And then the last thing, anthropological reflection concerning, these structures of human operations, of virtues. Mercy, an attribute of divine nature. Classical theology pointed out that given God's unique mode of existence, ipsum esse subsistens, which we can conceptually describe but cannot imagine, all of God's attributes must be realized in him in an absolutely perfect way, and consequently constitute a perfect unity that is not dependent in any way on the created world. Such a starting point of theological synthesis offered a very convenient model for showing the ultimate, so to speak, reconciliation of all attributes in God, between which we could see some tension in the created world, as for example between justice and mercy, which we often experience as being in conflict. In the divine fullness of life, the tensions we know from our experience must ultimately be surpassed due to the unimaginably more perfect way of existence of the divine essence than that of any created being. On the other hand, however, the attribute of mercy, unlike such attributes of the divine essence as goodness, unity, or infinity, for example, seems to carry an inherent relation to the created. After all, is not mercy tied to bending to some poverty, to remedying some deficiency? Was God's bringing of mercy to men not linked to sin, men's turning away from God? In addition to these questions, there is also the question of the primacy of the attribute of mercy that has been sometimes invoked in this context, following the biblical sources, as we understand. Can any attribute, moreover an attribute so burdened by its relation to the created, and therefore by definition somehow imperfect, due to its link to transience and suffering, be considered first among all divine attributes? Saint Thomas Aquinas is undoubtedly a theologian who set the tone for a consideration of all those subjects with great mastery. In his commentary on the Psalms, he commented on mercy in the following way. So let's start with this text. When mercy is spoken about in regard to God, it should be taken according to the mode of God, and in man according to the mode of man. Mercy is in a man when he feels compassion for the miseries of others. Now, it doesn't have this mode in God because God is impassible and doesn't feel compassion, since compassion is when someone takes the suffering of another's trouble into himself. Therefore, there is mercy in God when he repels the misery of each thing. Misery may be understood widely to mean defects. In other words, we should not think of God anthropomorphically. We can attribute mercy to God in the sense of a spiritual attitude that involves a desire to deliver from afflictions, to dismiss the misery and imperfection of created beings. The effects of God's action clearly indicate this. However, we must not think of God's mercy as being about feelings that would bring suffering into the divine nature. Let us keep in mind that which Thomas doesn't mention in this passage, but which is an obvious assumption, that the human experience of feelings is linked to having a body. God, on the other hand, is not only a spirit, but he is also the uncreated spirit, and therefore unimaginably perfect and fulfilled. We must always take this into account in our analysis. Having purified our thinking about God's mercy in this way, we can conclude mercy is to be attributed to God in the highest degree, as seen in its effect, but not as an affection of passion. If we take this direction in our interpretation of divine mercy, we gain the right perspective to understand why we can give mercy priority over justice as well. Aquinas thinks about these matters in a very metaphysical way. So Father Rector already mentioned it, and let's have a look a little bit at the details. In the first creation of things, there was no justice, but only mercy, since he owes nothing to nothing. But once he had established things, he gave to them all the appropriate things in due proportion. And the divine justice is manifested in this. And so also he brings about the effects of grace, since the first justification of the sinner comes from mercy. But after justification, he gives the reward of justice, since he gives according to what is proportionate for each one. And so mercy begins, and justice follows afterwards. As we can see, for Thomas, virtually all divine action in the created world is a work of mercy. It is, after all, always a remedy for some deficiency, and second thing, essentially an absolutely free work. God is not obligated to do anything, starting with the calling of things into existence. Of course, once the world has been called into existence, that is, a certain order has been given to it, with the order of justice at the forefront, then such order must be preserved. Note, however, that before that, and before in the chronological and first of all metaphysical sense, there is always a moment of absolute gratuitousness at the beginning of every action of God in the created world. This is the case both in the work of the very creation of the world, out of nothing, and in the order of grace. First, there is the gift that is absolutely undeserved, which establishes a certain order. Only then can we speak of the preservation of a certain order and therefore of justice. Still, Thomas is aware that it is impossible to bestow mercy on something that doesn't exist. So, comment one more step for philosophers here. And that there is a fundamental difference between God's action of creating out of nothing and guiding the created beings to their ends. So let's have a look at this passage. Mercy is said in two ways. In one way, as it drives off a pre-existing misery in a way that is not owed, and there can be no mercy in the work of creation in this manner. In the other way, generally, according as without it being owed, any defect whatsoever is removed. And in this way, there is mercy in the work of creation. For by creating, God removes the greatest defect, namely non-existence. And he did this by a gratuitous will, not constricted by any debt. Of course, mercy interpreted in this way must be considered as the root of all divine action in the created world. So in every work of God, view at its primary source, there appears mercy. It also helps to understand why God, without violating anyone's rights, can forgive all sins. A man shows mercy in remitting punishment. Yet here too, a qualification must be observed. He must not contravene the justice of a higher law. God, on the other hand, can remit all punishment, since he is not bound by any higher law. Thus, the mercy of God is infinite, because it is not limited by any higher law. Aquinas' interpretation of mercy, articulated in such a metaphysically nuanced way, places it as the first attribute of God, in an order that is defined by his relationship to the created world. Only in this way can it be spoken of as the first among the divine attributes. On the other hand, however, mercy is therefore not considered by Thomas as a perfection, so to speak, of the second rank, which only metaphorically and not formally as such should be attributed to God. Thomas closely associates mercy with love and considers it both as one of the ways of realizing love and as an essential element of it. And in this way, through love, he formally attributes mercy as a perfection to God. So, it's not a second rank perfection. So it's just to deal a little bit with this complex issue of how to inscribe mercy into the set of divine attributes and how to articulate it properly. Thomas Aquinas is a great master here. Let's go to the second important element of context I want to mention. So this economy, the cross of Christ. Such a description of the divine attribute of mercy forms the basis for all further speculation on the subject of divine mercy. But the privileged subject of the speculations is the cross of Christ. The tone for discussing this topic in the second millennium in Western theology was set by Saint Anselm, and his theory of satisfaction presented in Cur Deus Homo. In his argument, Anselm seeks to lead us to the conclusion that after original sin, the reparation of the sin-damaged order would not have been possible without the participation of Christ, the Son of God, and his freely accepted death. This is not the place to analyze Anselm's argument, which is both brilliant and controversial, as many of us know. What is relevant to us, and what has quite often eluded the attention of theologians, is the ambitious motive or goal behind the reasoning. Saint Anselm wants to lead us to discover that the redemption accomplished by Christ on the cross was a perfect realization and, as it were, a reconciliation, if we want, of divine justice and divine mercy. This is how he concludes his argument. Now, the mercy of God, which when we were considering the justice of God and the sin of mankind, seemed to you to be dead, we have found to be so great and so consonant with justice that a greater and juster mercy cannot be imagined. What indeed can be conceived of more merciful than that God the Father should say to a sinner condemned to eternal torments and lacking any means of redeeming himself, "Take my only begotten Son and give him on your behalf," and that the Son himself should say, "Take me and redeem yourself." For it is something of this sort that they say when they call us and draw us towards the Christian faith. What also could be juster than that the one to whom is given a reward greater than any debt should absolve all debt if it is presented with a feeling that is due? Interestingly enough, this conclusion is redolent of Anselm's famous ontological proof. Justice and mercy, which we in the created world perceive as competing with each other, can appear in one single fact as perfectly realized only because it is about mercy than which nothing greater can be imagined and justice than which nothing greater can be thought. In other words, the cross of Christ becomes the most spectacular place for the revelation of the unity of the divine attributes, whose perfect unity is fully realized in God, who should be understood as something than which nothing greater can be thought. Anselm thus submitted to the Western tradition of the second millennium the proposal of interpreting the cross as a place of encounter and reconciliation, of mercy and justice. The theme was taken up and was developed further. So, many different thinkers have done it. One of them was obviously St. Thomas Aquinas. I'm coming to the third part of this introduction. So, we spoke about theology, economy, and we are coming now to anthropology, virtues. The third classical locus of theological reflection on mercy was the discussion of love. The classical interpretation linked mercy to love as its particular realization. Linguistic considerations guided how this was to be understood. So let's take the example of St. Thomas once more. Mercy takes its name misericordia from denoting a man's compassionate heart, miserum cor, for another's unhappiness. This theme was taken up in the 20th century in a very interesting way. Clive Staple Lewis, in his famous book, The Four Loves, created a popular typology of love which brought its four different types: love habit, love friendship, love fascination, eros, and love mercy, agape, caritas. Significantly, Lewis emphasized that these were realities denoted in English and also in Polish by a single word. This led to the understanding that the presented dimensions should not be opposed to each other, but rather should be regarded as complementary. Yeah? The matter was important because the 20th century theologians were greatly impressed by Anders Nygren's work, Eros und Agape, in which the two most important forms of love out of the four, so love fascination and love mercy, eros and agape, were contrasted with each other. It seemed that true love, mercy, agape, could thus be born only on the ruins of, in the place of, the love we call eros, and that this was the thinking is truly, this was the way of thinking which is truly Christian. The matter must have seemed extremely important to Benedict XVI, since he devoted his first encyclical to love, Deus Caritas Est, and in its first part he elucidated that love fascination and love mercy, eros and agape, caritas, are two sides of one reality which should not be contrasted with each other. They belong to each other, complete each other. Having thus outlined the context, it is high time to move on to John Paul II's proposal in Dives in Misericordia. If I have chosen to devote so much attention to presenting the reflections on mercy in the Christian tradition that preceded Dives in Misericordia, I have done so out of the conviction that by being familiar, even if only in general terms, with the context into which John Paul II's encyclical was placed, we will be able to appreciate its innovative and groundbreaking character. For the Polish Pope doesn't choose to follow any of the paths of earlier reflections on mercy presented here, although, of course, all these lines of consideration are familiar to him. He respects them, and to some extent they appear throughout the pages of his encyclical. However, he chooses to propose a different starting point for his reflection that will synthesize those themes in a new way. In keeping with the age-old tradition of writing church documents, that which is most relevant to his idea is contained in the very first sentence of the encyclical. It is God who is rich in mercy, whom Jesus Christ has revealed to us as Father. It is his very Son who in himself has manifested him and made him known to us. It is the crucial statement. The revelation of the fatherly and therefore merciful face of God through Jesus becomes, in John Paul II's interpretation, the key to the whole reflection on God's mercy. In an effort to express this as clearly as possible, the Polish Pope makes the phrase from the Gospel of St. John, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father," so John 14:9, the leitmotif of the entire encyclical. It constitutes the title of the first chapter and reappears 6 times in this brief text, as if John Paul II was very concerned that we should not miss this concise biblical summary of his message. A starting point defined in this way contains extraordinary potential. It makes it possible to bring together and place many topics in a new light. I see it as the central doctrinal point of the entire pontificate of John Paul II and the key to the theology practice in keeping with his ideas. I will attempt to elaborate on what I see as the extraordinary potential here in several complementary reflections, successive variations of sorts, if you agree with such an image. So the first point, the bridge between anthropocentrism and theocentrism. The essence of the program of John Paul II's pontificate, announced in the encyclical Redemptor Hominis and later recalled on various occasions, is sometimes rightly associated with point 22 of the Constitution, Gaudium et Spes, which states that man cannot be understood without Christ, already quoted here by Father Rector. Unanimity. John Paul II wanted to constantly pursue through reflection about man, or even through conversation, like his famous colloquia at Castel Gandolfo, the starting point of arguments for finding a convincing way through Christ to God. If we keep in mind such an orientation of his whole intellectual project, it will be obvious to us that the perspective adopted by Dives in Misericordia, the revelation of the merciful face of the Father in Christ, is a natural and necessary complement to this approach. We will also understand that it is precisely this complement that is the most essential load-bearing element of the bridge we need to connect the anthropomorphism of modern culture with Christian theocentrism. John Paul II was aware of all this from the very first pages of the encyclical. So let's have a look at this passage. In Jesus Christ, every path to man, as it has been assigned once and for all to the Church in the changing context of the times, is simultaneously an approach to the Father and his love. The Second Vatican Council has confirmed this truth for our time. The more the Church's mission is centered upon man, the more it is, so to speak, anthropocentric, the more it must be confirmed and actualized theocentrically, that is to say, be directed in Jesus Christ to the Father. While the various currents of human thought, both in the past and at the present, have tended and still tend to separate theocentrism and anthropocentrism, and even to set them in opposition to each other, the Church, following Christ, seeks to link them up in human history in a deep and organic way. And this is also one of the basic principles, perhaps the most important one, of the teaching of the last council. So it's the passage which is crucial for Wojtyła to grasp what is the essence of the teaching of the Second Vatican Council. And this is, as you understand, connected with Gaudium et Spes 22, obviously. At the same time, this was not some tactical trick, a brilliant intellectual gimmick to dazzle the readers of the encyclical. An inspection of the manuscript may give us an idea of the laboriousness and persistence with which John Paul II worked on this text. Struggling to get almost every phrase right. You see? It was written like this. Yeah. A careful reading in time helps us notice the solemn tone of the whole that may make us think of this text as the heart of the entire ideological program of the pontificate, as a kind of its high priestly prayer. It is hard to resist the impression that John Paul II wanted to capture and encapsulate in this encyclical that which he considered to be the heart of his mission, and perhaps even more, what John Paul II considered to be the heart of the mission of Christ and of the Church of his time, or perhaps even of all times. So so the first point, the bridge between anthropocentrism and theocentrism, understood like this. The second point, the universal dimension of Christ's mission of mercy. The essence of the interpretation is related to the conviction that Christ's mission is making love present. So mercy is about that. Especially through his lifestyle and through his actions, Jesus revealed that love is present in the world in which we live. An effective love, a love that addresses itself to man and embraces everything that makes up his humanity. This love makes itself particularly noticed in contact with suffering, injustice, and poverty, in contact with the whole historical human condition, which in various ways manifests man's limitations and frailty, both physical and moral. It is precisely the mode and sphere in which love manifests itself that in biblical language is called mercy. So make love present. Making love present in Christ's activity is on the one hand the revelation of God the Father himself, and on the other hand bringing to final fulfillment the teaching on love and mercy of the Old Testament. So one more. In this way, in Christ and through Christ, God also becomes especially visible in his mercy. That is to say, there is emphasized that attribute of the divinity which the Old Testament, using various concepts and terms, already defined as mercy. Christ confers on the whole of the Old Testament tradition about God's mercy a definitive meaning. Not only does he speak of it and explain it by the use of comparisons and parables, but above all, he himself makes it incarnate and personifies it. He himself, in a certain sense, is mercy. To the person who sees it in him and finds it in him, God becomes visible in a particular way as the Father who is rich in mercy. The perspective of interpreting mercy adopted in this way allows John Paul II to go through the other great themes, but it is the pivotal part, to show the paternal, maternal character of God's love in the Old Testament. Let us notice the footnote about Hesed and Rahamim, very interesting note, in point 4. To discuss the parable of the prodigal son, to dive into the depth of the reflections on the cross and the Paschal mystery, and finally relate the reflections to the life of the Church and the challenges of the time, including the preparations for the Great Jubilee of 2000, which was then an important part of the agenda. His entire journey through the most important issues of faith, in many ways very impressive in its breadth and boldness, is undertaken with a fervent desire to show that and how the essence of the Messianic mission must be mercy. Messianic mission is just mercy. It's about it. Two dimensions of such an interpretation warrant a particular emphasis. First, mercy, when viewed in this way, turns out to be the bringing out of the good from under the layers of evil. This is what Christ shows us in a dazzling way. This is the essence of his message. The true and proper meaning of mercy doesn't consist only in looking, however penetratingly and compassionately, at moral, physical, or material evil. Mercy is manifested in its true and proper aspect when it restores to value, promotes and draws good from all the forms of evil existing in the world and in man. Understood in this way, mercy constitutes the fundamental content of the messianic message of Christ and the constitutive power of his mission. Second, the essence of the Christian message, interpreted in this way, leads one to conclude that it is impossible to have a Christology that would not be a theology of mercy, and of course, also conversely, a theology of mercy that would not be a Christology. And if this is the case with Christology, then it is also the case with any theology, simply speaking. Theology as such becomes, in John Paul II's edition, a theology of mercy. And the third point I would like to mention in this short, in my short struggle to present the extraordinary potential of this approach. So the face of the Father. Of course, we also cannot help but be struck by the connection between the revelation of mercy and the discovery of the face of the Father. The theme of fatherhood and Jesus' revelation of fatherhood were extremely dear to John Paul II. His reflection on the subject began well before his work on the encyclical Dives in Misericordia. To hint at this, I chose a title that is a quote from Redemptor Hominis, where John Paul II characterized the cross of Christ as a fresh manifestation of the eternal fatherhood of God. The encyclical Dives in Misericordia can be understood as an attempt to rethink this succinct reference from the first encyclical. However, it is worth noting that the roots of this sort of reflection go much further and deeper. In 1964, when he was 44 and already the Archbishop of Krakow, Karol Wojtyła wrote Radiation of Fatherhood. The work is subtitled Mystery, and indeed the first thing that strikes us about it is the difficulty in classifying it. It is something between a poem, a play, and a philosophical treatise. At the same time, however, it is apparent that the author is concerned with matters of the utmost importance. In his reflections, Wojtyła closely intertwines the divine with the human and strives to think through the meaning of human fatherhood as a reflection of divine life, and how to move from a fatherhood understood purely biologically and externally to a fatherhood lived spiritually and internally. The key point for the answer he gives is the ability of the one who is a biological father to take care of or even to save the life of his child, and therefore to utter the word mine in a deeply spiritual way about the child thus born anew, a second time spiritually. The word mine, spoken in this way, turns out to be an expression of responsibility and is not possessive. For if I know, after all, that the child I have or who is mine doesn't ultimately belong to me, it is only entrusted to me. In the encyclical, John Paul II doesn't develop this interpretation this time. This time, as we have seen, it is mercy understood as the ability to draw good from all the forms of evil existing in the world and in man that determines the possibility of finding, through the mediation of Christ, paternal features in God. However, the fervent desire to define as accurately as possible what the phenomenon of fatherhood consists of, and the conviction that these considerations are crucial for approaching the mystery of God and man, remain the same. Well, John Paul II's interpretation of mercy, as presented in Dives in Misericordia, was born out of his earlier reflections on Sister Faustina's message, just as it certainly also grew out of his meditations on the life and work of another great saint from Krakow who devoted his entire life to the merciful service of the poor, Brother Albert Chmielowski. The reflections of the Polish Pope, however, are by no means only an attempt to justify a local devotion or promote a particular spirituality calculated for subsequent beatifications and canonizations. John Paul II seeks to rethink and reformulate the faith of the Church. Wojtyła takes into account everything that formed him during his time in Krakow, but his intellectual horizons are much broader. When reading the encyclical The 20th Century Catastrophes, he experienced in a very personal way communism and Nazism come to mind, showing the victory of love in Christ, which doesn't let evil have the last word, was an invitation to hope, which was greatly needed by the generations affected by the cataclysm of the two world wars. His theology of mercy was above all a response to the dramas and hopelessness of the 20th century. And Pope Benedict XVI understood it very, very well and stressed it many times. It's one of the times when he interpreted Wojtyła's approach in such terms. Did his proposal fall on fertile soil, and was it embraced? Judging by the popular reception, which over time found its expression in the devotion associated with Sister Faustina's diary and the Chaplet of Divine Mercy, one would probably have to answer in the affirmative. It seems that the message of mercy devotion has been resonating throughout the world. The spark of faith in the power of God's mercy coming out of Krakow has ignited faith in many corners of the world. If we also assume that in Redemptor Hominis and Dives in Misericordia, John Paul II described not only a program for the Church and the world, but also his own personal program, which he then sought to implement throughout the remainder of his pontificate, then probably also in this case, in the case of a reception of his personal implementation of the program he wrote, the answer is in the affirmative. Millions of people around the world found in him someone who guided us with his life and activities to meet the merciful Father. Well, however, this answer must be a little different if we look at the theological reception. The results of a search by Cardinal Walter Kasper, who is among the few theologians of recent years to have seriously and systematically undertaken research on the subject of mercy, are instructive. In his book, he points out that until its publication in 2012, that is over 30 years after Dives in Misericordia, the topic of mercy received little attention in dogmatic textbooks. Kasper was talking mainly about the literature in German and French, and over 10 years have passed since the publication of his work. Pope Francis's mention of this very book by Kasper during the Angelus prayer on March 17, 2013, contributed greatly to its popularity, and Francis could undoubtedly be described as another Pope of Mercy, as perfectly illustrated by his recent encyclical Dilexit Nos. And even more than that, so if you take the very first 3 sentences from his famous bull Misericordia Vultus, opening the year of mercy in 2015, we find there, I would say, perfect synthesis concerning, Wojtyła's approach. Pope Francis understood what Wojtyła wanted, to promote, and his theological vision. Jesus Christ is the face of the Father's mercy. These words might well sum up the mystery of the Christian faith and of Dives in Misericordia. Mercy has become living and visible in Jesus of Nazareth, reaching its culmination in him. That's it. Even though the fervor and depth of the teaching of Dives in Misericordia remain present and palpable in the Church today, reformulating theology from the perspective of mercy seems to be still a project for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michał. Thank you very much for your most interesting lecture. Now let me kindly welcome our next speaker, Professor Izabela Rutkowska. Professor Rutkowska holds a PhD in humanities with a specialization in linguistics. She works at the State Academy of Applied Sciences in Głogów. She is an author of 2 monographs, the Ineffable Word of the Soul, the Language of Mystical Experience of St. Faustina Kowalska, and Through the Curtain of the Body, the Symbolism of Jesus' Body in the Image of Divine Mercy, and in the Diary of Santa Faustina. She has also translated over 10 theological books from Italian into Polish. Today, Professor Rutkowska will be giving a lecture entitled The Ocean of Divine Mercies, Sister Faustina Kowalska, Saint Faustina Kowalska, Life, Mission and Influence on Contemporaneity. Professor Rutkowska, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. This conference is very important for me to be here before such a noble audience. Thank you. The soul bounds forward vehemently toward God, and the 2 loves come face to face, the Creator and the creature. One little drop seeks to measure itself with the ocean. At first, the little drop wants to enclose the infinite ocean within itself, but at the same moment, it knows itself to be just one small drop, and it is vanquished, and it passes completely into God, like the drop into the ocean. The metaphor of the ocean used in the title is not a coincidence. St. Faustina, wanting at least roughly to illustrate the power of God's love, tried to reach for those natural phenomena that in her perception are the greatest, the most extensive, the largest, and the most intense. Of all the water reservoir available on earth, the largest is ocean. When St. Faustina uses this image about God, His love, His mercy, she usually adds epithets: bottomless, immeasurable, incomprehensible, indicating at the same time that in the case of God, it is about something more than the earthly ocean, and we cannot make them equal. Nevertheless, this image moves our imagination. Our senses cannot encompass the space beyond the horizon, and most of us will never touch the ocean floor. And it will be similar to this speech. It will be just a drop in this ungraspable reality of God's mercy. Faustina wrote about her life. O life, so dull and monotonous, how many treasures you contain. When I look at everything with the eyes of faith, no 2 hours are alike, and the dullness and monotony disappear. From the outside, St. Faustina's life seems grey and monotonous. Many people have wondered on what basis the Church canonized her. She made no scientific discoveries, founded no religious order, was not a social activist, did not have a convert from another religion, and did not die a martyr's death. For 16 years, she lived in a poor family. She lived in a poor rural family home in the village of Głogowiec. For 4 years, she experienced the lowest status of professional work as a domestic servant, nanny, and maid. 13 years she spent in the convent as a nun of the second choir, working in the garden, in the kitchen, at the gate. In the course of her convent life, she was transferred about 20 times to different places because of illness or revelations. She died at the age of just 33 years. And looking from the inside, judging a person's destiny by the measure of the inner human, as St. John Paul II was speaking so often, St. Faustina wrote, "The interior of my soul is like a large and magnificent world in which God and I live. A small fragment of this extraordinary, rich and colorful world is revealed in her spiritual diary. That's why I would like to focus especially on this part of her life, briefly showing the path of her earthly history on the slides with a calendar. Many of the sisters were unaware of her visionary spiritual life. The growing cult of the Divine Mercy in Vilnius revived interest in Sister Faustina. Father Michał Sopoćko, who had no doubts about her sanctity of her life, took care of the fate of her message. In his memoir, which is part of the testimony for the beatification process, he wrote the following about Sister Faustina. The exceptional subtlety of her conscience and close union with God attracted my attention. Not many theologians with years of study and training behind them could come up with solutions as simple and as good as those offered by Sister Faustina. In the diary, she wrote, Jesus said, "Write down everything that occurs to you regarding my goodness." I answered, "What do you mean, Lord? What if I write too much?" And the Lord replied, "My daughter, even if you were to speak at the same time in all human and angelic tongues, even then you would not have said very much, but on the contrary, you'd have sung in only a small measure the praises of my goodness, of my unfathomable mercy." Mystics who wrote their spiritual autobiographies belong to a particular group of writers. Their works display a dual attitude. On the one hand, they feel a great reluctance to record their mystical experiences. They declare a lack of literary skills and a general linguistic incompetence, since there are no words capable of describing this transcendent reality. As we read in St. John of the Cross, besides, it would be a sign of ignorance to think that the mystical songs of love, such as these stanzas, can be adequately explained in words. On the other hand, however, they are kindled by an immense need to write and talk about this type of experience. St. Hildegard of Bingen was ill until she described all of her visions. Faustina's profile does not differ much from the figure of other mystics. In her work, we can find the same reasons and writings goals as well as similar problems that she had to face to fulfill the task she had received. She called her own descriptions a pale shadow of the reality she viewed, a droplet from the ocean of the incomprehensible truth about God's mercy. St. Faustina consulted all her experiences and inner voices with her spiritual director, as reported in studies, procedural testimonies, and the diary itself. The idea of writing this work physically came from Father Michał Sopoćko, whom Faustina met in 1933 while staying in the convent in Vilnius. At that time, the priest was the father confessor of all the sisters in the congregation, and at the same time, he worked as a lecturer in the seminary and at the Faculty of Theology at Stephen Batory University. Father Michał's idea for his penitent to keep a diary was inspired by very prosaic reasons. Sister Faustina wanted to recount her own inner experiences in detail and took advantage of the opportunity for confession, which became longer and longer, which in turn aroused interest, curiosity and objections of other sisters. So, after another lengthy confession, Father Sopoćko ordered her to write down all her inner experiences, thoughts, visions in a notebook, and during confession only to confess sins. Faustina, obedient to her confessor, despite her inner reluctance and her own awareness of her lack of education, began to give accounts of her mystical experiences in the form of notes. She wrote 6 notebooks within 4 years. The period covers the last years of St. Faustina's life, and it is very important information because it was the most intense and major period of her spiritual life. She had already made her perpetual vows. The first record we find in the diary is dated 28 July 1934. It was not, however, the first note or evidence of the first mystical experience. St. Faustina began to write down her experiences already the year before, immediately after she met Father Michał. Biographers explain the discrepancies that emerged with an event in 1944 during the trip to the Holy Land. At that time, an angel appeared to St. Faustina twice, ordering her to destroy the notes she had been keeping so far. Succumbing to that voice, she burned everything she had written so far. When she later confessed that to her father confessor, he recognized the apparition as a devil's idea and ordered her to recreate the burned pages. This was the only incident of this type in the history of the creation of her work, but it had an impact on the entire layout of the content. Events and visions described on the days when they were experienced are interrupted by numerous retrospectives, flashbacks, and repetitions. The issue of various repetitions is related to the circumstances in which Faustina had to create. As a sister assigned to physical work, she usually had no time to write and at the same time care about the form, style, and coherence of her notes. The lack of time meant that she had little opportunity to analyze her own earlier descriptions in order to edit and rephrase them or return to written fragments. She wrote only in the moments free from work and on Sundays and holidays, at the same time hiding her writing activity from her fellow sisters. What can be said about her handwriting? After Faustina's death, a handwriting analysis was conducted by Raymond Trilot, who wrote, among others, "We have before us an energetic nature driven by the rhythm of effort, arranged slowly in a simple or even coarse environment, demanding, tough, very hard working, with a smile every day and highest spiritual aspiration. She is very sincere, and there is no combination of change of mindset and attitude in her. There is no shadow of vanity in her, but she can easily adapt herself to all circumstances with faith. Her intelligence is very simple by nature, but one gets an absolute impression of inspired writing, which contains intuitive knowledge of beings and events inexplicable by human understanding." According to my review of the photocopy of the manuscript, Faustina's handwriting should be considered meticulous and neat. She described her spiritual experiences while maintaining an appropriate text segmentation. The titles of subsequent notebooks, headings of some fragments, dates of subsequent entries are visible. And the difference between a poetic text, a text written in prose, or a text written in the form of a litany prayer, it is also marked. In addition to sequences of sentences and words, one can notice other graphic forms such as tables presenting a so-called internal control cards, bullet points, and scoring plan resolutions. and a sign of ruling of her own will, occupying an entire page in the manuscript. However, the meticulousness of her handwriting does not correspond to the forms of developed calligraphy that taught in schools at that time, which undoubtedly confirms, among other things, her poor education. What can be said about the style of the text and the choice of the vocabulary, its lexis? The Diary of St. Faustina destroys a stereotypical image of a mystical text as a work full of encrypted formulas that can only be read by a select group of initiated people. Faustina speaks of divine reality in human terms, in plain language. This phraseology is not only a metaphor for the simplicity of imagery, but as research has shown, an expression indicating this category of vocabulary from which she drew the most expressions, the category of human characteristics and behaviors. She presents theological truth and the biblical vision of the world using an existential variety of religious language. Such a suggestion can be found in one of Jesus' statements, which Faustina recorded under number 797. Speak to me about everything in a completely simple and human way. By this you will give me great joy. The simple language of your heart is more pleasing to me than the hymns composed in my honor. The colloquialism of her language is provided by evidence, the syntactic layer of simple utterance characterized by syntactic flow, patterns of a tendency towards abbreviation or simplification, the layer of grammar and orthography, which is really far from accuracy, university of lexis, and tangibility and figurativeness of the language. Despite this, the image of the world presented by Faustina cannot be regarded as naive. It is above all a biblical view of the world, deeply rooted in the New Testament and a profoundly evangelical vision of the world, as we are convinced by the type of adopted valuation, the wealth of religious vocabulary, and as biblical stylization, including metaphors and comparisons. We can see in the text that the vocabulary describing man and nature is incorporated in the semantic field of the sacred sphere, thus breaking at the same time the dualistic division of concepts into the sacrum and the profane. The vocabulary used to describe temporal and spatial relations also speaks of Christian axiology. Liturgical terms predominate in it. It can be even said that Faustina measures her space-time continuum with liturgy. The name of liturgical holiday and feast is more important than the date. The time of the Holy Mass is more important for her than the clock hour. Her dialects with Jesus, however, do not resemble formulas from prayer books of the time. In their style and straightforwardness, they are closer to an ordinary conversation or a confession of love. The example of contact between man and God presented in the diary may therefore help the reader find ways to express their own religious feelings linguistically, may show and teach a new type of prayer and perception of the transcendent reality, far from hieraticism and formulacity. The lexis used to describe Faustina's mystical experiences also proves that the saint did not create new words. She did not experiment. When finding something indescribable, she stated that it is beyond words. She ceased writing about it and put a full stop. Therefore, it can be assumed that the diary corresponds to the painting, just as not in the beauty of the color nor of the brush lies lies the greatness of this image, but in my grace. The main purpose of the diary is to proclaim the message of God's mercy. She wrote, I want to tell souls of your goodness and encourage them to trust in your mercy. That is my mission, which you yourself have entrusted to me, O Lord, in this life and in the life to come. But the other goal, no less important, is to unveil the reality of the transcendent world. O God, how I desire that souls come to know you and to see that you have created them because of your unfathomable love, O my Creator and love. Lord, I feel that I'm going to remove the veil of heaven so that earth will no doubt your goodness. We can find in Faustina's text as many as 294 descriptions of visions and apparitions revealing the reality of heaven, purgatory, and hell, out of which 77% account for descriptions of heaven and people living in heaven. There we can find a very vivid image of purgatory and hell, which Faustina did not see as empty. When reading the saint's notes, one can get the impression that she experienced her earthly existence as a space filled with a permanent presence of figures from the world of sacrum, in the spiritual and eternal order, not only in the worldly and temporal one. The meaning of the notion of mercy acquires a new dimension in her notes, and its semantic scope expands its boundaries. Recognizing it as a paramount divine attribute, Faustina teaches that above all, at least in this respect, a man is to be like God, and in every manifestation of their existence through every part of their body. The biblical connotation, usually limited to the image of Good Samaritan of the merciful Father, expands with each act of divine action, seeing God's mercy already in the creation of the world and its culmination in the birth, suffering, passion, death, and resurrection of Christ. According to her teaching, every sacrament is such an act, not only the sacrament of penance. By personally experiencing this transcendent reality and the union with the loving spouse, she reveals mercy as God's power that almost makes it possible to make God equal to man. The meaning that she outlines in the diary has nothing to do with pity and showing help from the position of a better and stronger person. Moreover, considering over 1,000 instances of use of this word in her diary, there is no such collocation as human mercy. It is always presented as divine mercy. And even if a person is to show mercy to another person, as Faustina says, they should show them God's mercy, not their own. But there is a question how to do it. The answer we can find in the image of Jesus. In the diary, there are 19 descriptions of Jesus' revelation showing him in the figure known from the picture, but there is only one description guiding how a depiction of the divine mercy should be painted. And this is this fragment. It is the only one in the diary. The date is marked as 1931 February 22. This apparition took place in Płock, but its confirmation could only occur in Vilnius, thanks to Father Michał Sopoćko. The task which Eugeniusz Kazimierowski undertook at his request took approximately 6 months, from January to June 1934. Interestingly, the first date recorded in the diary is July 28, 1934, quite some time after the painting was finished. The first recorded word referred to this event. O eternal love, you command your sacred image to be painted. And this tells us how significant the correlation between the painting and the text must be. It also hints that the text takes second place in this case. The diary probably would not have existed if she had not gotten the command to paint the image of divine mercy. Faustina was given a specific order. There is to be a signature at the bottom, and it is to be the exact one that Jesus dedicated to her. Jesus, I trust in you. What does the phrase mean? First of all, it invites a dialogue with the painted person. It is a confession to which all contemplation of the person of Jesus leads. Significantly, this is a personal act of a single individual, not a crowd of believers. The image is a crucial element of devotion to the divine mercy, to which Jesus attaches significant promises. I promise that the soul that will venerate this image will not perish. I also promise victory over its enemies already here on earth, especially at the hour of death. I myself will defend it as my own glory. I am offering people a vessel with which they are to keep coming for graces to the fountain of mercy. That vessel is this image with the signature, Jesus, I trust in you. The image as a vessel is a concretization of divine mercy, which in itself as a concept seems quite abstract and incalculable, like love, light, water. It is also a mirror into which every person should look, probing to what extent he becomes like his creator, that is, to what extent his body becomes a channel of divine mercy. But before we began to talk about social changes or the explosion of various works of mercy inspired by the message revealed to Sister Faustina, we should first and foremost depict the transformation of the cult of divine mercy itself. The topic of divine mercy exists in the writings of the Church from the very beginning, just as there are separate prayers dedicated to God's mercy. In the times of St. Faustina, the order she joined paid particular attention to the way of the cross and the hour of 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Also, the order had the chaplet of divine mercy recitation in its liturgy. The chaplet, composed and approved by the Church, popular in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Apparition vouchsafed to Faustina introduced new forms of worship, the image, a separate feast, and also the text of the prayer itself changed. The old version of the chaplet sounds as follows. Comparing its content with the chaplet written on pages of the diary, first of all, we notice the difference in the recipient. In the previous version, it is Jesus Christ. In the new one, it is God the Father. The old chaplet is mainly a call for mercy, whereas the new one is an act of offering. In addition, the old prayer reveals a certain religious courtesy learned from interpersonal relations. In order to ask someone for something, one should first compliment them and thus gain the favor. The compliment used in this act of courtesy is an artful rhetorical contrast, one that on the one hand, the sender notices the divine attribute of almightness in order to immediately refer to the attribute even greater, namely merciful love, which surpasses the omnipotence. God, who can do anything, cannot but have a mercy on someone who repents his sins and asks for forgiveness. It must be admitted that in such a form, this prayer would be incomprehensible today, not only at both lexical and grammatical levels, but also in the rhetorical level. The new prayer dedicated to Faustina by Jesus is much simpler in its discourse and also it allows for a much more direct tone to God. At the same time, drawing attention to many more aspects. Using a few words, it emphasizes quite precisely the relationships of all persons. The sender is first of all a child of God, but also a sinner in solidarity with other sinners and the whole world. The addressee is God the Father of Jesus, but also of his creatures. The subject of the entire statement, that is the subject of the sacrifice, and at the same time the argument motivating the request and the ransom, as the Bible calls it, it is Jesus Christ. The person of Jesus has been precisely defined as in the Creed. The person praying does not only mention the name of the Son of God, but the four parts of his person that characterize his nature as God and man, two natural, connecting him with the earth, his body and blood, and two supernatural, connecting him with the heaven, the soul and divinity. The prayer emphasized that the essence of the devotion is contemplation of the whole person of Jesus, unlike in the devotion of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. The chaplet is not only a contemplation of just single part or attribute, as the image of merciful Jesus also shows it, the whole body. The prayer, Eternal Father, is very similar to the one which the angel in Fatima taught Lucia, Jacinta, and Francisco in 1916. In its form, it refers to many former prayers we can find in the prayer books from the beginning of the 20th century. Is still what we can see in its Polish version retains the elements of archaic syntax. Its main novelty refers to the addressee, it is God the Father, and also to the sender, it is each praying person marked as me, not as collective we. It builds a profile of the sender as a sacrificer, a conscious follower concerned with the salvation of the whole world like Jesus Christ. And this gives a sort of priestly dignity to each praying person. The prayer for his sorrowful passion in the content of the earlier chaplet, only the invocation was written here, O my Jesus, mercy. The new formula complements it and better defines divine and human relations. We owe this precision, among other things, to its syntactic structure, a sentence, not a sentence equivalent. It contains the verb in the second person singular form used in the imperative mode have, as well as two personal pronouns, his, us. This sentence therefore speaks of the mutual relation of three individual persons to a group of persons represented by the pronoun we, as well as to the object designed by the lexeme world. This text also shows the evaluation of similar prayers, usually merits of the saints of the Mother of God, or the Mother of God, we were invoked in them. Here, however, there are no intermediaries. The only argument is Jesus Christ himself. What is noteworthy in the presence of the supplication, Holy God? What is noteworthy is the presence of the supplication, Holy God, which thus far had been recited only in three circumstances: during the liturgy of Good Friday, at death, and during natural disasters and wars. The prayer itself belongs to the oldest canon of Christianity, previously called Trisagion. The commandment to end the chaplet of divine mercy with this solemn invocation gives it unique character and raises its rank. The cult of divine mercy began to develop shortly after the death of Sister Faustina, especially during World War II, which we owe especially to the Vilnius Center. The Marian priest Józef Jarzębowski made great contributions to spreading the cult abroad. During the occupation, he escaped from Vilnius, taking with him a memorandum of the devotion to the Divine Mercy by Father Sopoćko, and reached the United States and in an almost miraculous way, traveling through Siberia and Japan. The soldiers from the Polish armed forces, led by General Władysław Anders, also made some contributions to spreading the cult. Owing to them, the cult of mercy reached Iran, Palestine, Lebanon, and Egypt, and from there to Africa and Italy. Even during the war, the text of the Novena of Divine Mercy, the chaplet, and the litany appeared in German, Lithuanian, French, Italian, and English. The painting of Adolf Hyła, venerated in Łagiwniki, is also a result of the wartime, since it is a votive offering for the saved life of this painter. During wartime, thanks to Father Michał Sopoćko, the first hearings of witnesses to St. Faustina's life were initiated in the name of her future beatification process. Thanks to him, both the image and the diary survived. After the war, this cult began to grow more and more, and even if it raised individual objection, nothing indicated that it would be withheld. The main reason was a poorly conducted process of approving the apparitions described in the diary. The text, poorly copied, as a consequence badly translated, was rejected by the Vatican Commission, which in 1959 published a notification of the Holy Office banning the distribution of images of Jesus and prayers revealed to St. Faustina. The subject of Faustina and her message returned only in 1965, thanks to Cardinal Andrzej Deskur and the interest of the Metropolitan Bishop of Krakow, Karol Wojtyła. It was on his order that the official information process concerning the life and virtues of St. Faustina began, which ended in 1967. For this purpose, 75 sessions of the tribunal were held and 45 witnesses were heard. In addition, an extensive theological commentary was developed by Professor Father Ignacy Różycki, which confirmed the theological correctness of Faustina's notes and the supernatural nature of her apparition. Thanks to the above efforts, on 30 June 1978, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith annulled the notification and published a new one, lifting the ban on spreading the devotion to Divine Mercy. Immediately afterwards, that efforts were made to issue a critical edition of the diary, which was published in 1981 in Rome and also in Stockbridge in the USA. Along with the official permission to develop the new devotion and dissemination of the diary, the publication of the images of the merciful Jesus was resumed, and the previously removed images of the merciful Jesus were hung in churches again. A year before the publication of Faustina's mystical work, Pope John Paul II published the encyclical Dives in Misericordia, which became the doctrinal basis for the content of the diary. The next milestones related to the dissemination of the message and devotion to Divine Mercy were marked by the beatification, which finally resolved all hesitations regarding the person of Faustina, and then, and even with the greater force, by her canonization, 30 April 2000. Which also became an opportunity to establish the Feast of Divine Mercy, which has been celebrated in the Catholic Church every year since then on the first Sunday after Easter Sunday. The next significant event was the death of Pope John Paul II on 2nd April 2005, and the eve on the eve of the Feast of Divine Mercy. The next important step was the announcement by Pope Francis the Jubilee of Mercy in the liturgical year 2015 and 2016, and publishing a special papal document, Misericordiae Vultus. During this year, it was just Kraków and the sanctuary in Łagiewniki that were chosen for the celebration of World Youth Days, which was also dedicated to the message of Saint Faustina. What is worth adding to events promoting the cult of divine mercy is unprecedented artistic action of the political theology community, which dared to commission contemporary artists to paint the image of Jesus, who appeared to Faustina in Płock in 1933. An important sign of the increasing popularity of devotion to divine mercy is the foundation of new churches, parishes, sanctuaries dedicated to divine mercy. Or St. Faustina Kowalska in Poland, there are currently over 200 parishes dedicated to divine mercy, circa 70 churches dedicated to divine mercy, of which 10 are sanctuaries of diocesan rank. Outside Poland, some sanctuaries are emerged in such countries as the USA, Italy, Mexico, Philippines, Lithuania, Scotland, Argentina, Peru, Brazil, Indonesia, Salvador, Madagascar, Tanzania, Samoa Island, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Japan. In addition, over 60 churches are dedicated to St. Faustina Kowalska in Poland and over 30 in other countries. Along with the establishment of sanctuaries, the need arose to have the relics of St. Faustina Kowalska, as determined by the sisters from the Congregation of Our Lady of Mercy. The relics of St. Faustina were taken to 130 countries of the world and 5,600 churches. Therefore, they are present on all continents. After her beatification and canonization, and after the establishment of the Sunday of Mercy, the last step in appreciating the person of Sister Faustina and the message conveyed in her diary seems to be the postulate to recognize her as a doctor of the Church. Since 2016, the Marian Fathers have been collecting signatures for such a petition. And finally, my conclusion. The life of St. Faustina, from the outside, inconspicuous, unremarkable, unattractive, sometimes downright monotonous, and sometimes too difficult, illustrates the message of the gospel and thus breaks all the stereotypes and invites us to look deeper inside, beyond the veil of everyday life. Just as the life and death of Jesus Christ himself teach, which at the external level definitely were no object of envy. His divine dignity did not spare him suffering. Faustina herself did not experience relief from the hardship of ordinary human existence due to the mission entrusted to her. Her parents' hearts were not miraculously transformed in order to join the convent. She had to run away from her family home. No one gave her relief from the convent etiquette. She had to work for the dowry required at that time. The revelations she had did not contribute to improving her status. In fact, they caused her suffering because she had to constantly change the convent houses. In addition, the illness she suffered from, although it emancipated her body, did not give symptoms noticeable enough for everyone around her to understand her intensity of her suffering and thus empathize with her, exempt her from the duties. There were no crowds at her funeral. However, it was she who became one of the most significant mystics of the Catholic Church. She was entrusted with the devotion, the message, the mystery of divine mercy, which was to be announced to the whole world, and which is particularly important even in the perspective of the end times. The history of how this cult came into light is indeed unbelievable. The diary, written with spelling mistakes and in an unsophisticated style, given before her death to Father Michał Sopoćko, managed to survive the years of war and not to burn up. And even the years associated with the ban issued by the Holy See itself. At present, it has already been translated into most of the languages of the world. Similarly, the image taken down, removed, hidden, covered, destroyed many times, considered to be competition for the cult of the heart of Jesus, nowadays adorns cathedrals, churches, and chapels all over the world. We can repeat after Matthew the evangelist, the stone which the builders rejected, this became the cornerstone. Thanks to prophetic intuition of priests such as Michał Sopoćko, Józef Andrasz, Józef Jarzębowski, Andrzej Deskur, Karol Wojtyła, and many others, all the commands of Jesus related to the development and sanctioning the cult of divine mercy were fulfilled. However, despite all these accomplishments and all the knowledge resulting from the research on the diary, it is still appropriate for us to repeat the words that Jesus said to Faustina. Even if you were to speak at the same time in all human and angelic tongues, even then you would not have said very much, but on the contrary, you would have sung in only a small measure the praises of my goodness, of my unfathomable mercy. Thanks to simplicity of Faustina's message, divine mercy is not only an abstract attribute of God which should be worshipped, it is his nature which is to become in his image and likeness the nature of man. It is an everybody and tangible reality, incarnate, immersed not only in the spirit but also in the body, based on relationships, on compassion and empathy, on shared responsibility for the salvation of the whole world. Thank you.
Please sit down. We'll have a short discussion before a coffee break. So if you'll be so kind and come, and you're welcome to give a question to our... Frankly speaking, we are run of time, but I hope. So maybe I'll start with one question. When John Paul II was chosen Pope, and he was living in Krakow, I've heard it from Cardinal Nitsch. Someone asked him about Santa Faustina. She was not Santa, and cult of a divine mercy according to the diary was forbidden at the time. And I've heard that his answer was, "This is always on the first place for me." What's impressive, because probably you've noticed already that even now, after canonization, etc., the divine mercy cult is not a beloved subject for intellectuals. I mean, it's not easy to find a professor who is ready to give a speech on Santa Faustina Kowalska. And Wojtyła was a proper professor of philosophy. And it's always interesting for me, because I have a feeling that the giants see each other over our Lilliput heads. I mean, that they know the importance and the scale of some prophecies, some ideas, some acts. And it's interesting for me, how can you describe, I'm asking Father Michał, the say deep relation between the Santa Faustina diary and, let's say, heritage and Wojtyła. How can you answer that question? I mean, if you try to point.
Haven't I answered this question in my?
Yes,
in my
you did,
speech?
but to sum up, but precisely between diary and.
Well, as we understand, what is common is this conviction that that really mercy is and should be now the face of God. Yes, it's the way of our access to God. The only way, which is really, how to say, reliable in this world, which has been submitted to all those catastrophes and all those challenges Wojtyła tried to understand, Wojtyła experienced himself. Yes, so I would say that it is I think his personal conviction that the answer must be given by the simple nun and simple sister. So I would say, listening to your speech, well, my idea was a little bit that this first image that they presented with Wojtyła at the beginning of his life, you know, as a simple worker, and on this other side, Wojtyła as the Archbishop of Rome, might be replaced with the image of Faustina and Wojtyła to some extent. They complete each other in a very similar way, so to say. Yes, expressing and articulating the same message, you know, from two different angles.
In all this message of divine mercy, we have a very holistic way of devotion, because we have words and image. We have whole body of the God and man. We have the God's nature and man's nature. And I think that all this message can be understood thanks to all these languages.
Yeah, thank you for the lectures. My name is Jan Bednarski. I'm a student in JP2 Studies program. And I have a question regarding the notion of mercy and justice meeting on the cross. So some theologians tend to saying that the cross happened only because God wanted to show us his unconditional love. So they are not talking about the redemption from the sin. And you mentioned, Father, you mentioned Cardinal Kasper as a kind of continuator of divine mercy theology of John Paul II. And yeah, I would like to ask the question whether his theology is not tending towards this kind of view of mercy, and if he is continuator of John Paul II's thoughts, then how does he arrive at kind of different pastoral solutions, for instance, regarding the communion for the divorced?
Well, I didn't say, actually, if you listened carefully to what I said, that Walter Kasper is a continuator, just a continuator of the theology of John Paul II. I mentioned that he belongs to very few theologians who tried to work on the subject of mercy in a systematic way. Yes, and it is what I wanted to say. Well, I think that there are many different interpretation of the mystery of redemption, as we know in the Catholic Church, and there are different philosophical framework on which theology is developed today. So it's true that Walter Kasper belongs to this group of theologians who try to work on the basis of this Hegelian philosophical framework as the basis for his theological interpretation, and it brings him to some conclusions to which theologians who work on the basis of the classical framework, like Thomas Aquinas, won't be able to wouldn't like to get and wouldn't be open to get. Nevertheless, I would say that still his book is a quite valuable contribution, which pushes us to notice the subject, yeah, and to take it into account. Yes, perhaps it should be articulated in a different way, or in different ways, because there is a need of some broader theological discussion. Nevertheless, I think that he belongs to this small group of people who understood how important this topic was. By the way, it's quite funny to see that he, in his criticism towards the theologians of the past 30 or 40 years, he included himself, saying that I belong to this group as well, which didn't realize how important this topic of mercy was, and because of that he wanted, to make his steps in this direction. But obviously, as you understand, he's working with some premises which wouldn't be shared probably by classical Thomism, or in general, probably I guess that even by Karol Wojtyła.
Thank you very much. May I have an applause for our speakers. Thank you very much for a very exciting lectures. Let's start 15 minutes break. We are running out of time. The coffee is in Homiciclo, so please follow the sign on the wall to go to the place, because now we are in ruins.
If I move it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second part of the conference today. This will be a time for presentations from our guests representing church organizations dealing with areas needing acts of mercy. So practical mercy is now welcome. Our first speaker is Mr. Alistair Dutton. Secretary General of Caritas Internationalis, one of the most important help organizations in the world. Mr. Dutton was elected Secretary General of Caritas Internationalis after having served as Chief Executive of Caritas Scotland for 9 years. Previously, he had been Caritas Internationalis' Humanitarian Director for 5 years and Interim Director of the Sphere project, which sets international standards for humanitarian aid. Mr. Dutton is an engineer, studied physics at the University of Durham and philosophy, politics and economics at the University of Oxford. He has worked in the international relief and development sector for more than 25 years, during which time he has worked in more than 60 countries. No mistake, 60. Unbelievable. Today, he will be presenting the mission and work of Caritas International in the speech entitled The Quality of Mercy. Mr. Dutton, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As I was introduced, yes, I'm Alistair. I'm the Secretary General of Caritas, which is, if you like, the official relief and development agency of the Church worldwide. And so we have 164 national members, national organizations who belong to their respective bishops' conferences. And I have the enviable job of trying to bring some order among all of the chaos. So that's where I fit in. I must confess, after the erudition and systematic treatment of mercy earlier, I feel somewhat intimidated. Among the schema of the theological, economical, and the anthropological, I fear I'm going to take us well into the anthropological, so forgive me, and I just hope I don't fall into the trap of being anthropocentric. I can't even say it. Anthropocentric. So I'm very struck how fitting it is that we have a conference on mercy this week after we've just had the funeral of Pope Francis. And we know Pope Francis really made mercy and the issue of mercy the motif in the way he lived, in what he said, in the works he promoted, and in where he did. And I think as well, he really stands for me as reinvigorating that challenge of Christ when he quotes Hosea and says, "Go and learn the meanings of the words. Mercy is what pleases me, not sacrifice." And so I'm quite interested, maybe we might talk later, about how in human terms we make mercy subservient to justice when what is pleasing is mercy. We can have that conversation later. One way I think is an interesting way of reading the Gospels is to look at two passages that hold the public life of Christ almost in parentheses. And so for me, the first of those, and it starts at the beginning of Luke, or early in Luke, I should say, in the 4th chapter, where having been baptized and being very clear what the identity of Christ is, we learn he is the Son of God in whom the Father is well pleased, our Father. We are all brothers and sisters as he comes in clear, this is my Son, the beloved, in whom I'm well pleased. He then goes out into the desert, as we know, and has this time of testing. And it's a testing of power, a testing of wealth and ownership, and a testing of allegiance. But then, having had all of that period of reflection and that growing sense of who he is, he comes into the world to tell us who he is and show us how he's going to live. And he doesn't start with a long discourse on mercy, at least not directly. And he doesn't start with lots of theology or talk of justice or judgment or sin. It's very simple. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because I came to bring good news for the poor, liberty to captives, sight to the blind, a year of favor from the Lord. So that's what it's all about. But what does that mean? And for what will we be judged? And there I turn to the end of his public life. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work so well for me because I have to switch to Matthew at this point. Luke doesn't quite wrap it up so neatly for me. But if I am allowed to turn to Matthew, he then asks the question, what will we be judged for? And he says, come you whom my Father has blessed, take as your heritage the kingdom prepared for you since the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. Lacking clothes, and you clothed me. Sick, and you visited me. In prison, and you came to see me. And of course, this is, if you like, the instigation of the corporal works of mercy. And the image I've put up actually is by a German painter, Sigur Koda, who I've used many of his images on my retreats. But this is his image of those 7 works of mercy. And you can make them out. The drink in there, the bread in there, the stranger being welcomed in, the prisoner and the sick being tended to and visited, etc. So, Caritas then, as an organisation, is charged with being the embodiment of Caritas. That's far too bold a claim to make, as part of the embodiment of Caritas on behalf of the church. There are many, many, many in the church who do wonderful works of charity, so I don't claim anything like a monopoly, and that would be entirely wrong. But Pope Francis was always very clear. There is no church without Caritas. And there is no Caritas without the church. And so hopefully that saves me from being too anthropocentric. I'm not going to get that right, am I? At the heart of Caritas's mission then is a preferential option for the poor. A preferential option to be those who are suffering in our midst, who live in poverty, who are in need, and to whom we respond with compassion. And I quite like that definition we were shown earlier, that that mercy is love manifest to those who are who are suffering. And so from that then, it's quite simple as to what we do. So we feed the hungry. We give drink to the thirsty. And I just so you can see the examples, this is a picture from Uganda where we're working with South Sudanese refugees. In Nigeria, where we've been working with water and providing a community with water, providing shelter to the homeless. And here the example is from Poland, actually, where we've been working with refugees from the Ukraine, visiting the sick. And here our example is Syria. We were also just talking about Syria, and we worked together in Aleppo, where I was only in January, visiting the prisoners. And here Cambodia is the example we have. But and burying the dead. And these are, if you like, these are the basic works of what Caritas does worldwide. But we have to think of them in a continuum of need, if you like. There is the very imminent need of emergencies, at which point it is just the right thing to be giving food or giving water. So it can be as immediate as handing out cooked meals. But people are never caught in an emergency. And it's essential that we walk with people where they are, that we respond to their need as it changes all of the time. And honestly, it changes within days as well as between days. So if you're worried about how to feed your child tonight, the most important thing is to find a meal for that child. But once the child has gone to bed and is safe and is warm, then people start to think about, so how will we feed tomorrow? And how will we earn a living in order to be able to feed them continually? And so, on the example of feeding, perhaps, we have examples where it can be as immediate as handing out cooked food or bottles of water or hot drinks, because that's what's needed immediately there and then. It can be providing more of a food ration for longer periods of time, often a month or so people have the food at home, but the life of the home can return to something more normal. So you try to adopt an integral human development approach where we're trying to renormalize the life of the family, but they're also able to feed their children. And then we have longer-term programs about how we help people to transform their agriculture, perhaps, and grow more crops, or to start businesses so that they can earn more money and then pay for the food themselves. And longer-term, even, it can be about how we bring the land back to life. And I don't use that phrase glibly, but how we bring the land back to life so that it can grow crops, so that they can harvest, so that they can feed. And there are two wonderful examples of that I've talked about at other times, where in valleys that I've visited, which were completely barren and were semi-desert, through programs of watershed management and terracing and replanting, we have increased the capture of the rains in the soil so that the water table has come back up. And not today, but I have video of rivers flowing where there was not a river for 30 years since the hills and mountains had been deforested. So within an integral approach to development, I mean, that's trying to look after all the spiritual, physical, economic, psychological, and the whole gamut of needs of individuals within their families, within their communities, always at the heart of which is how do we restore dignity to the people within their own settings? And then, in the words of John the Baptist, how can we become less so that they can become more? Because if we're not careful to do that, we build a whole cycle of dependency where they need us, and that's not what it's about at all. It's about how do we build back so that they are in control of the decisions that affect them and ultimately just to run their lives once again. On top of that, you may well be familiar with the idea of spheres of control and spheres of influence. So there are the things that we can work with people that they can control. So whether they plant seeds or not, whether they help the land to rejuvenate, whether they work or not. But there are the global and national and even more local structures of injustice that mean that people are trapped in poverty, because no matter what they do, the systems will drive them back down into poverty. And that can be global food systems, it can be climate change, it can be governance issues within a country and corruption, it can be a whole gamut of things. And so Caritas, together with communities, is often involved in advocacy where we're helping them to identify and prioritize the issues that really make and keep them poor, and who do they have to influence to change those systems so they can be free to live their lives and their dreams. And that's the importance of the advocacy part of our work. That's a little bit about what we do. But equally important is how we do it. And so I think the third biblical text, which sits in the middle for me, just because that's where it appears textually as well, is the parable of the Good Samaritan, where it is not just about the Good Samaritan looking after the man who's been beaten up, but it's the whole approach of the Samaritan. It's the encounter between the Samaritan and the person in need and how that plays out. And one poem that I will often share with staff, and I say to them, you should read this before you go into any community. And it's by William Butler Yeats. And he says, had I the heavens embroidered cloths, enwrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and the half-light, I would spread these cloths beneath your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams beneath your feet. Tread softly, for you tread on my dreams. And every encounter with those who are suffering, with those who are poor, is an entry into the fragility of dreams. And the challenge to us is how to make dreams come true. And now I just want to leave you with a model of mercy. And forgive me, Helen and I were talking earlier, two Brits talking about Shakespeare. So I'm going to leave you with a bit of Shakespeare. But just, excuse me, referring back to that conversation earlier about the great men looking over the heads of the women. In this play, it is a woman, a daughter. Something's got me this afternoon. Anyway, a woman, a daughter, who, pleading for the life of her father, dresses as a man in order to get into the court. And pleading to the court as a whole, she says, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the heart of kings. It is an attribute to God himself, and earthly power does show likest God when mercy seasons justice." And she goes on. Sorry, I just need to pull up the last two lines. She goes on. And this is referring, of course, in The Merchant of Venice, so I'll make it less specific. When mercy seasons justice. Therefore, though justice be thy plea, remember this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy. And that same plea does teach us all to render the acts of mercy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dutton, for your presentation. Our next speaker is Massimiliano Signifredi, representing the Sant'Egidio community. Mr. Signifredi holds the PhD in church history. He is the author of many scientific works on the history of Poland in modern times, which investigate in particular the relationship between religion and politics in the 20th century. He collaborates with various newspaper and magazines, such like L'Osservatore Romano, Limes, Rivista Italiana di Geopolitica, the Huffington Post Italia, and Niedziela. He has been associated with the Community of Sant'Egidio, whose communication office he coordinates. Today he will give a presentation entitled Mercy Without Borders, the Community of Sant'Egidio. Mr. Signifredi, please, the floor is yours. You can sit down.
It's better for me. I'm used to this kind of. Thank you, Professor Karłowicz. I'm truly happy and honored to speak at this conference with distinguished speakers and experts of St. Faustina Kowalska. The reflection on the message of divine mercy is so important for the Church. I would say, and certainly it wasn't the intention of the organizers of the conference, whom I thank for having invited me, after the death of Pope Francis, during the sede vacante, the reflection about divine mercy is more important. Because the divine mercy is a fundamental legacy of recent pontificates, and must also be so for the next. It is not necessary to recall the bonds of Karol Wojtyła with divine mercy. I will, as historian that investigated the history of Poland, it's important to stress that Karol Wojtyła reinterpreted the dramatic events of the 20th century in the light of the message of the divine mercy. Book, I don't know, is it in English, Pamięć I Tożsamość. This legacy must not be lost. Memory and identity, yeah. This legacy must not be lost. The Church of the 21st century must be founded on the message of divine mercy. And now, some words about Sant'Egidio. Your small community posed itself no borders from the very beginning, if not that of charity. These words of John Paul II, creative words, no border, but border of charity, that has no borders, summarized the charism of Sant'Egidio in 1988 on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of its foundation. With that speech, Pope Wojtyła noted how the spirit of the Second Vatican Council was being realized in the experience of Sant'Egidio, and stated in the Constitution Gaudium et Spes, the beginning that we know by heart, the joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the men of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted. These are the joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the followers of Christ. In more than 50 years, Sant'Egidio was provoked by the anguish and hopes that we encountered, and to which we tried to respond without resignation. We have taken on some wounds that we felt were ours, even though they seemed far from our reality. This was the case of the cry for peace that raised from Mozambique, devastated by 17 years of civil war with 1 million of deaths, and from many countries crossed by conflicts, as forgotten as they were bloody. We have taken responsibility for African AIDS patients without access to treatment, for African children who are not registered at the Civil Status Office. We have taken responsibility for the elderly, the great emerging continent of our era, which gives us decades of life, but is unable to give meaning to weakness. For migrants and those who have lost everything because of the war, for many homeless and new poor in our cities. The gospel parable of the Good Samaritan does not reveal who the half-dead man is. In reality, he has many faces. Those I have mentioned and many others, always new, to discover and love. Daring a comparison with the story of Saint Faustina, in particular with the last years of her life spent at the gatehouse of the convent in Łagiewnicki, we could say that Sant'Egidio has exercised a gatehouse ministry from the beginning, standing at the door to meet, as in the diary of Saint Faustina, with sweetness and calm, those who knock in search of help, and putting into practice the Lord's instruction to Faustina. I quote, "Go and open the gate and talk to them as sweetly as you talk to me." A gatehouse ministry, let it be said in brackets, was also exercised by the young Karol Wojtyła in the parlor of the Archbishop Palace in Krakow, where is his seminary. We read in the testimony of Kazimierz Antoni Suder, companion in the clandestine seminary in the palace of Archbishop Sapieha. He was in charge of the parlor, where many came to ask for help, and he gave his help. He did it even outside the seminary, for example, when he went to the university with clothes as something else. End of quotation. But let's go back to Sant'Egidio. We were born in 1968 when an 18-year-old high school student, Andrea Riccardi, gathered a group of students to reflect on the gospel. They asked themselves how to overcome the loneliness that affects the lives of people in a big city like Rome. The answer was to stay together and live not for themselves, but for an ideal, love for others and especially for the poorest. 1968 was the year of protest, but also of audacity. The Church was living the spring of the Council. In Rome, 100,000 people, mostly immigrants from southern Italy, were surviving in slums. The encounter with this third world at home called for a response. To change the world, we have always believed in Sant'Egidio, you have to start from your own heart and yourself. The first exit was towards difficult neighborhoods marked by poverty and lack of education on the outskirts of Rome. An alliance with the children started and lasts to this day with the so-called schools of peace, spread to 73 countries around the world, where the community is present, to offer thousands of children scholastic support, but above all, education in peace and coexistence. It is a work of training a new peaceful generation, especially in countries where violence is widespread, perpetrated by youth gangs, as in the case of the Maras in Central America, or of recovering many lost children, such as street children in the huge suburbs of African cities. Since that first meeting, many doors have opened at an international level. I would like just to mention 2 humanitarian programs that implement this mercy without borders. The DREAM program for the care of AIDS patients represents the largest, most ambitious and effective AIDS care intervention entirely free for local populations ever carried out in Africa. Started 23 years ago, it has 50 centers in 10 countries, with more than 500,000 people in care and 150,000 children born healthy to HIV-positive mothers. Together with this lives saved, DREAM has brought about a cultural revolution, freeing women and men from the burden of the shame of the disease, and training thousands of health workers who today know how to fight and defeat AIDS, a fate that became culture, John Paul II would have said, and the culture of life. A second program, Bravo, launched in 2008, has enabled the registration of 5 million children and adults in Burkina Faso, Malawi, and Mozambique, finally giving them an official name and an existence as citizens. This problem responds to a dramatic phenomenon. Out of 125 million children born each year, 51 million, quite half, are not registered at the civil status and are invisible. That means deprived of a legal existence. These children grow up without essential services such as school and healthcare, and can be sexually exploited, become child labor, or indeed enlisted in armed militias. One of the challenges that Sant'Egidio feels more urgently is that of peace. There are too many conflicts in the world, and unfortunately, war is accepted by our contemporaries with too much resignation, or considered as an adequate instrument to resolve conflicts. But war is the mother of all poverties. How many pages does Sister Faustina dedicate to the horror of war in her diary? Indeed, it is precisely to stop war that Faustina received the revelation of the prayer by which she is known in the world. I just quote the beginning. In the evening, when I was in my cell, I saw an angel, the executor of divine wrath. You remember this is number 474 in the diary. And she started to pray as we all pray, thanks to the revelation of the prayer of the Koronka Miłosierdzia Bożego. Sant'Egidio believes that peace is always possible. We have strongly believed this since 1992, when the General Peace Agreement for Mozambique was signed in Rome in the 4th of October, St. Francis Day, not casual day. Mozambique was devastated by years of civil war, millions of deaths, millions of refugees, and great poverty. Since then, Sant'Egidio's peace initiatives have multiplied from Algeria to Guatemala, from Liberia to Ivory Coast, from South Sudan to Central African Republic, where we also cooperated with the Polish government for the release of a priest, Father Mateusz Dziedzic Starnowa from Tarnów, which was kidnapped by a group of rebels. It is not simply a question of diplomacy. With a spiritual eye, we can say that we are trying to drive away the demon of war, praying like Faustina. The war is a demon, we have to pray to pull this demon away. It's a spiritual matter, it's not diplomacy. And I have to tell, when it was signed, the agreement for Mozambique, American journalists, unfortunately, I have to say America, but Americans are very good. My English is not so good. But American journalists asked, when did you move from to be a spiritual movement to a group that try to arrange diplomacy? And we say, no, we always pray in our church. We pray for peace in our church. That's why we achieved peace. Not diplomats. We are not diplomats. We are lay Christians engaged in the society. Facing the tragedy of war and thousands of refugees dying in the Mediterranean Sea while trying to reach Europe, the idea of humanitarian corridors was born in 2016 in cooperation with various entities, Italian Protestant churches, Italian Episcopal Conference, for different refugees from Africa, from Syria, from Afghanistan, from the terrible detention center in Libya, but also from the refugee camps in Greece and Cyprus. A small humanitarian corridor was created by Sant'Egidio and Pope Francis, as it is remembered these days. Even BBC, CBS wanted to have this story in those days. And they broadcasted this, how Pope Francis cared about refugees from the island of Lesbos. But it is significant that some of the Muslim families rescued by the Pope from the island of Lesbos were present at his funeral. The humanitarian corridor have already allowed 8,000 vulnerable people to arrive to Italy legally and safely. I would like to conclude with an image, and I now know how was the original expression in Polish that John Paul II used to describe creativity of love, imagination of mercy, something like that. We have to imagine things to see this idea. Imagination is powerful. And the image I would like to share with you is the Christmas lunch with the poor that Sant'Egidio organizes since 1982, beginning from the Basilica of Santa Maria in Trastevere, where the community prays every day. From this place, the Christmas lunch has reached over 70 countries around the world. It is a sort of an icon of mercy without borders, a sign of a church with doors open to all. At Christmas, Sant'Egidio, wherever he is present, celebrate with his friend from over the year as if they were a family, the homeless, refugees, the Roma, prisoners, the elderly, and so on. The poor at the heart of Christmas represent a modern nativity scene, which speaks a human language, yes, an evangelical humanism that challenges the society of materialism and individualism, showing that happiness is not a bread that can be eaten alone. It is also the image of happiness, and Benedict XVI noted this with fineness when, participating in a lunch with the poor at the community canteen on 2009, stated, I quote, "Here today it is realized what happens at home. Who serves and helps is confused with whom is helped and served. And the first place is for those who are the most in need." End of quotation. Taking up again the diary of Saint Faustina, this gospel of mercy announced on the eve of the great cataclysm of the Second World War, I conclude with a short story. We are in the gatehouse of the convent of Łagiewnicki in November 37, and the scene of the final judgment from chapter 25 of the Gospel of Matthew is repeated, when Jesus identifies with those who are hungry, who are thirsty, naked, sick, or in prison. Jesus came, Faustina wrote, Jesus came to the main entrance today under the guise of a poor young man. This young man, emaciated, barefoot, and bareheaded, and with his clothes in tatters, was frozen because the day was cold and rainy. He asked for something hot to eat. The story goes on, is the diary 1312. As I was taking the bowl from him, he gave me to know that he was the Lord of heaven and earth. When I saw him as he was, he vanished from my sight. When I went back, I heard these words in my soul. My daughter, the blessing of the poor who bless me as they leave this gate has reached my ears, and your compassion within the bounds of obedience has pleased me, and this is why I came down from my throne, to taste the fruits of your mercy. The encounter with the poor has freed energies of good and has made us free from selfishness, but above all, it has helped us to discover the face of God, who manifests himself in them in a very special way. together with the poor, we understand Jesus' invitation to Sister Faustina to persevere in prayer, because prayer and activity to the poor must be linked always. Do not fear, my little child, you are not alone. Fight bravely, because my arm is supporting you. Fight for the salvation of souls, exhorting them to trust in my mercy. I thank you for your attention, and I hope my words in complicated English language can be understood.
Have to rearrange a little bit. Thank you very much for your presentation. Yeah, it's not as often I try to count the numbers of a moving moment during that conference. It was a lot of them. Let me now give the floor to our last but absolutely not least speaker, Sister Michaela from the Sisters of Merciful Jesus. Sisters of Merciful Jesus. She is the founder of the hospice in Gorzów Wielkopolski, it's in Poland, and the Blessed Father Michał Sopoćko hospice in Vilnius, the first hospice in Lithuania. For her service, she received the Officer's Cross of the Order of Rebirth of Poland from the hands of President of Poland, Andrzej Duda. She is also recipient of awards such as Paul of a Year, Glory of Lithuania, and the St. Christopher Award. She is a friend of the poor and sick. She has led thousands of people to eternity. Sister Michaela will help us to return to Sister Faustina Kowalska, whose mission is continued by her congregation and, I strongly believe, by her personally. Sister Michaela is with two friends from Poland and Lithuania, so please present them to our friends. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję, kochani Państwo. Dzisiaj padło tyle określeń miłosierdzia i jest jeszcze jedno określenie, bo ja Was dzisiaj proszę o miłosierdzie, bo nie mówię po angielsku.
Thank you very much. We spoke a lot about mercy, and I ask you for an act of mercy for myself because I don't speak English.
I było wiele przekazanych nam takich głębokich treści właśnie o miłosierdziu i w teologii, a nasze wystąpienie jest o miłosierdziu w czynie, a do czynu potrzeba wiele rąk, wiele umysłów, wielu serc.
We spoke a lot about profound mercy, but we'll speak like in a simple words about mercy in practice, acts, works of mercy.
Jest tu tylko moje nazwisko, ale właśnie obok mnie właśnie siedzą ludzie, którzy są przedstawicielami tych, z którymi niesiemy miłosierdzie w codzienności.
Yes, so there's written only my surname, but I'm not alone. Hospice, where I work, there are a lot of other people, and we bring mercy in our everyday life.
Aneta, która jest wicedyrektorem hospicjum i reprezentuje pracowników etatowych, i Łukasz, który jest przedstawicielem grupy wolontaryjnej.
Aneta is vice director. It's right hand of Sister Michaela, and she represents our employees. And myself, my name is Łukasz. I'm a volunteer of hospice.
Ja gdzieś w głębi serca noszę właśnie takie proste słowo, które padło od Jezusa do Faustyny Świętej. Mówi: podaję ludziom ostatnią deskę ratunku. To jest moje miłosierdzie.
In the depth of my heart, like Jesus said to St. Faustina, I give you the last hope for the world, it's divine mercy. It's my mercy, Jesus said.
Deska ratunku, czyli ktoś tonie. I dzisiejszy świat tonie w egoizmie, w niewierze, w zagubieniu i miłosierdzie jest właśnie tą deską ratunku.
Like while I spoke about the last hope, Jesus meant like life belt, and now world is sinking. It's without faith and so on.
A święty Jan Paweł II właśnie w encyklice o miłosierdziu Bożym w Dives in Misericordia powiedział, że w miłosierdziu człowiek znajdzie szczęście, a świat pokój.
Saint John Paul II said that in mercy, people, humankind will find the joy, and the world will find peace.
I to jest taki sygnał dla nas, żebyśmy my dzisiaj nie byli tylko obserwatorami tego, co się dzieje.
And it's a signal for us in 21st century, for us to not be like only spectators, be observers, but
żebyśmy nie byli komentatorami tego, co się dzieje,
for us not to be like commentators of that what is happening,
ale uczestnikami właśnie wyciągania ludzi z potopu.
But for us to be participants, to not let people sink and to bring them from the death to breathe, yeah.
I to się dokona wtedy, kiedy zobaczymy właśnie Boga w drugim człowieku i zatrzymamy się przy tym człowieku.
And it will be done only then when we will see God in other people and God in other people, and when we'll stop and see God in.
Żebyśmy go zauważyli, zatrzymali się, posłuchali.
To notice, to stop, to listen to him.
I kiedy się wsłuchamy i usłyszymy, czego pragnie, weszli w przestrzeń jego pragnień i wyciągnęli go z tego potopu braków. Kiedy zauważymy właśnie to, czego on pragnie,
when we see what God wants,
żebyśmy weszli w tą przestrzeń pragnień i naszym miłosierdziem wyciągnęli go.
For us to enter the zone, let's say, the space,
i pomóc.
And help, and give the mercy. Yeah.
A właśnie też święty Jan Paweł II mówił, że my mamy być narzędziami miłosierdzia.
Saint John Paul II said that we have to be tools of mercy.
Czyli wejść w czyn. I ja poproszę Anetę, żeby pokazała właśnie już w przestrzeni takiej, gdzie będziecie mogli zobaczyć, kochani Państwo, ten czyn, którym wchodzimy w przestrzeń cierpienia.
I'll ask Aneta to speak. Possiamo mettere video.
God created the world out of love, and He rewarded every human being with this love. Today, when we look at the reality full of violence and hatred around us, we sometimes think that God is indifferent, that He has forgotten us, but His love is eternal and unchanging. This is why Christ appeared to Sister Faustina in 1931 and entrusted her with the mission of reminding the world of God's mercy, which is the best remedy for all our sufferings. He told her to paint a picture that would bear witness to the most important qualities of God. 3 years later, she was assisted in this task by Father Michaela, who himself became a preacher of the cult of divine mercy. Jesus said to Sister Faustina, "The greatness of this painting is not in the beauty of the paint or the brush, but in my grace." Jesus is always ready to stand beside us. We just have to let Him. He is the one who takes the first step and lends His hand to us in a gesture of blessing. He looks down on us as if looking down on us from the cross. His sacrifice is the ultimate manifestation of God's mercy. It is the sacrifice that gave us the possibility of eternal life, the pale ray of light that flows from the Savior's sacraments of baptism and confession. The red ray is the blood, the Eucharist, which unites us to God. The words, Jesus, I trust in you, remind us that trust in God is our greatest hope. It is what opens our hearts to God's grace. Through trust, His love fills and transforms us. He enables us to become better and to share this extraordinary gift with others. After all, mercy is more than compassion. It is love in action. By showing kindness, we make the world a better place. By caring for the weakest and the needy, we show our love for God. This is the best response to the evil, sin, sickness, loneliness, and despair of the modern world. 90 years ago, the message of God's mercy spread from Vilnius to the world through the image of the merciful Jesus. It continues to spread from the city of mercy, whose inhabitants, despite famine, floods, wars, and fires, are still ready to share kindness and love with others. Trusting in God's goodness and showing mercy to our neighbors are the two pillars on which the idea of divine mercy rests. The Son of God, who became man and came to know the misery of man, invites us to make a daily effort by our actions, words, and prayers to repent and make amends for the wrong we have done. Let us respond to His call by bringing mercy to a world that needs it more than ever.
I właśnie przyjechaliśmy z Wilna, gdzie błogosławiony ksiądz Michał Sopoćko polecił siostrze Faustynie pisać dzienniczek.
And we came from Vilnius, where a confessor of Sister Faustina, blessed Father Sopoćko, asked her to write the diary.
I ten dzienniczek, który znany jest w całym świecie, swoje źródło ma w Wilnie, z którego to Wilna ze źródła przyjechaliśmy do
And
Państwa.
the diary of Sister Faustina has its font, its source in our city from which we came from.
I w naszej codzienności, właśnie w takiej praktyce miłosierdzia, pochylamy się właśnie nad człowiekiem cierpiącym, chorym i na ostatnim etapie jego życia.
In our everyday life, we have suffering people, ill, sick people in the last phase of their life in hospice.
I teraz Aneta jako nasza jedna wspólnota hospicyjna poprowadzi dalej.
Aneta will speak further as our hospice community.
I will speak about divine merciful in action, I can say. Here is some very symbolical picture. This picture paint our volunteer. We have merciful Jesus and mercy works for the body. We take this mercy to our patients, and also we have mercy works for the soul. Because the patients have sacraments. In the hospice story, we have patients who have baptized or have confirmation in the hospice, and that's very, very glad. And we have also Catholic priester and Orthodox priester who comes to the patients. We celebrate Holy Mass, and that's very important in the hospice mission. We are proud because we live in the capital of Lithuania, in Vilnius, and Vilnius is the city of divine mercy because here lives Saint Sister Faustina. Here was blessed priester Michał Sopoćko, and on this picture you can see the room who was living Sister Faustina in Vilnius, and here Jesus dictated the chapter of divine mercy, and this place is very important because on September we will celebrate 19th anniversary of dictate the chapter of divine mercy. That's very important for our city, for Vilnius, and for all world. Divine mercy, this is this first and original picture of merciful Jesus, who have painted Eugeniusz Kazimierowski, and here is the sanctuary of the Divine Mercy in center of Vilnius, and in the center is this picture of merciful Jesus, and this picture was painted with present the Sister Faustina and Blessed Priester Michał Sopoćko. Now about the Blessed Michał Sopoćko Hospice. This is first and only one palliative care institution in Lithuania. We have we take care for the adults and also for the children. They need help, they need support, medical support and other support. And also we have home care when the nurses, doctors, psychologists goes to the patients at the home and take care. This is the logo of the hospice. It's very symbolical because we have national colors of Lithuania, and this is a house inscribed in the heart. If you look, that we have here a house and the heart that's need the patients. They need this suffer, help, love, and the help and this mercy who we are giving to the patients. This is picture from our office. Blessed Priest Michał Sopoćko, Saint Faustina, and the Pope John Paul II is with us and are take care for us. We have some Run of the Hope to mark the 60th anniversary of the death of the John Paul II. Run our volunteers and give this hope for the patient that they can have this professional help, not only medical but also spiritual, social, psychologist. This holistic look is very important for the people, also for the emotions. What they want. We try to that the dreams comes true our patients, and that's very important. And very important is that professional help of the hospice for the patients or for and also for the families is free of charge. We take this love, give this mercy for the sick people who need our help. Free of charge. The mostly is oncological disease of the patients, but also other illnesses, and we take care for the adults, also for the children. This is very important. In 2018, when the Pope Franciscus was in Lithuania, it was official visit in Lithuania, and he stopped and goes to the patients and blessed our patients who are waiting for the Pope Francesco, and that's very important. That it was work of mercy because Pope shows for the world that powerless and sick people are important in our society, and we must give this help, this love, our time for these people, that they are important, and we must take care about these people. We are very happy that Mr. President of Lithuania with his wife comes to hospice to visit the patient. He was speaking with the patient and give this time for the patients, and that was also some act of mercy for our patients. The dreams come true. This woman is our patient, and she wants go to the Trakai. This is very beautiful city, and he was born here, and she wants to celebrate this birthday. And Sister Michaela with the volunteers make that this dream come true. And she was very happy. And also come one woman who say, okay, I will make makeup for you. You must be pretty woman for this birthday. And that's also that the people have open hearts and want to give this help, this time for the people. And that's very, very important, and was very happy, this woman, because this was, she said, the most beautiful birthday who he have. She was very happy with the volunteers, with his doctor, and that was very, very nice time. And we are happy that we can do that. This dream comes true. Also, here is a very young patient. She wants, and she have some like tradition, because she with the son went to the cathedral square, to the Christmas tree, and she was ill and she can't go alone, but with the hospice employers, with the hospice volunteers, these dreams come true, and she was very, very happy because she can see the Christmas tree, be with the son, and was very, very happy. Provide opportunities. This is very young man who have disease, shortly in English it will be ALS. That's mean that she can move because it was very serious illness, and he have on the computer eye tracker, and he can write on the eyes, and the eyes was only one. He can communicate with the world with eyes, and we gave these opportunities. He have say, I have here good help, and I can be active in. He establish a shop, establish foundation, and with the eyes write his memory, like memory book. And he have say, I have here good people, they take care about me, and I can be so active also in social media. Also, we take care for the children. This is not only oncological disease, also neurological, genetics disease. We celebrate Mother's Day, and we are very happy that comes young people, some plays, some give these talents, are singing for the people, for the patients, and that's very, very happy that comes people who give this time, talents, and take care about hospice patients, young actress, and she comes with the fairy tale, magic star, and for the children, and that was very warm meeting with this actress, and very beautiful time. Fields of hope, that's very important because we played this Narcissus, and when we sent the message for the society that hospice need support, and the people come be with us and give this support, and come to volunteering and take care about patients. Here is how we have employers, and we have helped in last year 215 patients. That means children and adults in home care, and also in hospice building. The volunteers who come to collect the monies, take care about patients, speaking, sometimes be in silence, reading together, or speaking just about life. they are also going to walk with the patients, and that's very, very nice that this is a work of mercy that they give this time for our patients.
I my w naszej misji hospicyjnej niesiemy przesłanie właśnie świętego Jana Pawła II. Człowiek jest nam dany i zadany.
We bring the thought of John Paul II that a human is given for us, but it's also like a task for us to live with him, to work with him, and to give ourselves to that person.
I kiedy przy tych ludziach, których kres życia dobiega końca, stają ludzie inni z miłością, to każdy chce żyć do końca, bo czuje się, że każdy dzień jest szczęśliwym dniem.
And at that time of end of life of those ill people, when there are other people who want to help them, who want to say them that we are with you, those sick people want to live to the last day of their lives.
I kiedy w 2015 roku na Litwie trwały procedury, żeby zalegalizować eutanazję, nasi pacjenci
And back in 2015, when in Lithuanian Parliament there was a procedure of euthanasia to become like legal.
ofiarowali swój ból, swoje cierpienie o mądrość dla posłów.
They offered their suffer for the parliament members to be wise, let's say.
Napisaliśmy taki apel do każdego posła Litwy, żeby człowiek żył, a nie był zabijany.
We wrote the letter to all Lithuanian parliament members that human have to live and not to be killed.
I w tym dniu, kiedy była właśnie procedowana ustawa o eutanazji, pacjenci powiedzieli, żeby nawet nie podawać im leków przeciwbólowych.
And in that day when there was a procedure held in parliament, our patients who said that we don't want any morphine and so on, they were suffering and offering their pain for that procedure to not legalize euthanasia.
I nie została zalegalizowana.
And it's not legal. Thanks God.
I to jest miłosierdzie, które przemienia oblicze świata.
And it's mercy which changes the face of the world.
I to jest to przesłanie, które płynie właśnie z tego, co wszyscy nosimy. Cokolwiek uczyniliście jednemu z tych, mnieście uczynili.
And that's the message. What you have done for all the least, you made it to me.
I to jest miłosierdzie, które daje szczęście.
That's mercy which brings us happiness.
Mamy jeszcze taki 10-minutowy film, ale nie wiem, czy wytrzymacie Państwo.
No, we're joking. We have a movie of 10. Please scan QR code and please visit our website. You can write us an email and we will be glad to speak more about our
I dziękuję za
Thank
zaproszenie.
You very much. Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you for Sister Michaela and friends for the presentation. We now have a few minutes for question before we go on the last point of our program. It's short film, but not that one. So, if you have any question, I say Sister Helen Alford.
Thank you very much. I was intrigued when you said at the beginning, Dariusz, that this could be the time of mercy, that mercy could be the most important, that the historian looking back, 200 years from now, could say that. And I thought, well, I was kind of intrigued by this. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And I think listening to what's happened today, I think this is quite an interesting idea, and I'd just like to go back to it and reflect a little bit and listen to what other people say. First of all, I'd like to say something to Massimiliano, because when I was listening to your talk, Massimiliano, it made me think about, I had to do a talk last summer on the idea of homo mendicans, which of course is completely anachronistic in terms of the time when the mendicant orders were founded. Nobody used this term. The reason why this term was being used now is that they were trying to use it as an alternative to homo economicus. How could we have a different kind of view of the human person? And what struck me when I was looking at that is, I started to think, why did the mendicants start being called mendicants? Because if they'd had the name they really wanted, that it would have been Homo imitator Christi, because that was what they were really trying to do, trying to live like Christ, you know. And then in order to live like Christ, they needed to be humble. So that was the next stage. And to be humble, it was very useful to be poor. And to be poor, then it was a very kind of effective in the kind of new society that was being formed then to be mendicants, a difference from the communal poverty of the Benedictines before, which was more the sedentary rural society. We had the city society developing at that time, and the mendicancy made sense, this sort of two-way relationship, you know. And I was thinking about that when you were talking about how people say, but how can you do diplomacy and pray? You know, it's interesting, though, that it's the sort of practical thing that comes over to people. In the end, the friars got called the mendicants, even though that wasn't really primarily what they were about. But people saw this. It was an effect they had in society. And it's a bit like, I think, those journalists asking you this question, you know, you're doing diplomacy, how does the prayer... Obviously, it wasn't exactly the same because you're in a much more religious society in medieval times than we are now. But also listening to you, I was thinking, you know, these are the mendicants of today, the lay movements now, because you're really out in where the society is and you're really bringing the life of faith into those circumstances, just like the mendicant movements were trying to do that in the medieval period, you know. And I also was thinking about this, just reflecting everybody, and then I'll shut up, is we've done this big project on these videos on fraternity, because we wanted to work on the idea of fraternity because Pope Francis was launching it so much. So we've done this series of videos which will launch later this year on universal fraternity, an idea that could change the world. I was thinking about this when you said historians will look back and think about this period to do with mercy, you see, because we're sort of trying to launch this idea of fraternity as a sort of big idea around which people could work. And so I was thinking, well, maybe it should be more the homo misericordians, you know, than the fraternity. Also because, you know, I have to say the amount of problems we have on the gender aspect of fraternity, people don't like this term because they don't see it as really connected with women. Whereas we saw these wonderful stories. We saw Sister Faustina, Sister Michaela, you know, the women are really in the mercy story, you know, and the mercy is characterizing this. It seems to me really, really interesting idea, which I'd never thought about in this sort of way before. So I just wanted to reflect with you on this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for these moving talks. I have a question to Mr. Alistair. So coming from kind of a business and product management background, I often find the tension between like measurable growth and at the same time respecting the dignity of every individual, and especially in an organization like you are leading. What's the way to kind of embrace the operational excellence without falling into trap of reducing people to just numbers you are trying to increase? So I would like to ask you the question, what principles help you balance these impact metrics with the dignity of each person you are helping?
This is on, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Thanks. It's always interesting when I get a question from business. So I think one of the tensions is between business, which is about return, and a preferential option for the poor. Having said that, unless we help build functioning economies, then we just build dependence. And so those two live in tension. And part of the solution is that we can't do everything. And there is a need for an entrepreneurial spirit and a real growth in technology, industry and business in order to create wealth that makes jobs, that provides a long-term economic future for people. At the same time, and we are always trying to work with the poorest of the poor. So if our criteria becomes return, then we're probably working with the wrong people. And so the selection of people precedes, if you like, the criteria for impact. So we're working with that group. At the same time, we're working often with individuals or small groups within communities. I've seen incomes go up by a factor of 10 through some of our projects. So people who had very little food at all, actually growing massive surpluses that they then take to, as the yield from the crops has gone up by a factor of 10, so they take the surplus to market and then they have money in the homes, often for the first time, and then you start to see things snowballing. We probably build more local economies and kind of local, that move from a system of barter to a system of exchange and some creation of surplus to start to be able to have greater choice about the things you can introduce to homes and communities. But at the same time, there are occasionally you really hit gold. And there's many examples, but one I can think of in Addis Ababa, where we had a program for women in the city, where we were teaching them quite basic dressmaking skills, garment making skills. And at the end of the program with us, we gave each of the women a sewing machine. Well, the next thing we know, this woman is employing 10 people and running a shop down the road. And before we know it, she's running a garment factory in Addis Ababa. Anyway, long story short, she built up a massive business, sold that, became a millionaire in Ethiopian terms, and went on and built 2 or 3 other businesses. So occasionally you hit gold, but that's the same, in Italy and the UK, anywhere in Europe or beyond. There are those entrepreneurs who really hit gold, but you've got to cater for a wide range of economic interests. And as I say, ours is always about the poorest of the poor. So we're going to find those nuggets less frequently than if we were looking for them in the first place. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So if there is no more question, let me thank to all speakers.
Can I just come back on Sister Helen, actually, about it ends in practical things. In the end, it is by our fruits we shall be known. And, there's the phrase, pray always, occasionally use words. Well, preach always and occasionally use words. It's by being out there and really being in the midst of people and responding to people that we will be known.
I think I have a kind of explanation on your question, but it requires a longer longer lecture. So I promise I'll do it in autumn. We'll have a conference on solidarity, and I'll write an essay on solidarity and mercy. And I think I try to explain a thought which was beyond that. Let me thank again to the speaker. Thank you very much for your moving testimony and lecture. It was a very long journey from, say, sophisticated theology directly to the human person, living word with someone present. And I think it was a good order. Thank you very much for that. Now let me invite you to the last element of our conference, or one before last, because last is a small reception. Please feel invited and please join us in the reception. And before, we'll have a short movie which shows relation between John Paul II and Santa Faustina Kowalska. Thank you very much.